This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning we will be holding our monthly question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Assembly Member Ahmad, for whom Assembly Member Small Edwards is attending as a substitute.
Thank you. And thank you, James, for attending. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if any members have any other interest to declare? Assembly Member Roberts.
As a member of the Trustee Board for the Royal Parks, we have a question possibly coming about that later.
Oh, I'm sure we do. I have every confidence, Assembly Member Roberts. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of February 2025 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. Can we note the response received from the Mayor to the committee's report Preventing Violence and Protecting Young People? Thank you. And now we move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Kaya Comer-Schwartz. I apologise. Kaya Comer-Schwartz. Who, of course, is our Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. And I'm so sorry you've got a bad throat today, so we'll all try and persevere with that. And Kenny Bowie, who is the Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight from the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, known by us, of course, as MOPAC. So just before I start the questions, Kaya, the Police and Crime Plan, exactly when is that coming out?
I think it's imminent. The release is imminent.
It's got to be imminent.
Oh, yeah, no, it is.
No, it's got to be legally.
Yeah, no.
So we know that. So it's got to be out by Monday of next week. So
it will be.
Of course. But any sooner, or is it going to the wire?
I mean, I'm pretty sure it will be, but definitely by Monday. I don't think there's any issues with that.
Okay, not before is basically.
I mean, I know it's on schedule to be released, so.
Okay, that's the last day it can be released legally, so I was just wondering. And when will we get our response, or get a response from you as to our response to it?
Very soon. We've received, obviously, your response, and we're working on our response, but that will be imminently this week as well.
Okay, fine. And as we're talking about crime, most of us are very shocked and upset about the baby that was abandoned. Do you have any update on that?
No, I mean, I think we need, I'm sure it's just such a heartbreaking situation. I think we reiterate the Met's and health's concern for the mother, and really hope she gets in touch with statutory services as soon as possible. I know the police were saying that she can report to any hospital or police station anywhere in London, and you know, for her own safety, she needs to do that.
Yeah, well, let's hope she does. I just wondered if you had an update, but let's hope she does that. Right, we're going to start the first section, which is on the Casey review, 2 years on. So I'll start. Obviously, all the questions are going to you, Kaya. How would you describe the level and pace of progress made by the Met since Baroness Casey's review was published in March 2023?
We know that the Casey review was obviously a landmark review of London policing, and it found racism, misogyny and homophobia, as well as a culture of defensiveness, resistance to change and an unwillingness to engage with communities. We have to note that that was 2 years ago, and the Met has put the Mayor has put the Met on a path of far-reaching cultural reform, and this is fully committed to by the Metropolitan Police, and they are actively trying to work towards long-lasting and meaningful change. I'm assured, as I know the committee was, by the progress made by the inspection by His Majesty's Inspectorate that confirmed in January significant improvement was being made by the MPS, and that was both on transforming culture and performance. This has led to the Met being removed from engage or special measures. I can hear your voice is bad, and you're reading some of these answers. If you want to give us a shorter answer to help your voice, just from what you know, that would be acceptable. Yeah, I'm just conscious that obviously this is for the public as well, so I want to make sure I have accurate information. But yes, obviously I'll try. I don't want. Okay. I'm conscious it's going to be a long meeting, and me croaking through it's going to be difficult. But that's why if you want to give shorter answers as opposed to the ones you've got written down, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. Obviously, the Mayor was really wanted to make sure that in the key areas that affect Londoners most, in emergency response time, vetting, and response to neighbourhood policing, as well as safeguarding, that those things were moved on, and as well as supporting London's diverse communities and women and girls. And so those are the areas he gave additional funding to. And the HMIC was particularly asked to look, I know this is something that the committee has been concerned about themselves, around child sexual exploitation, and it's reassuring to see that the HMIC found significant improvement in that area, including its treatment of missing children and victim blaming. We've seen great examples of the Met working towards that cultural change in the last few years, including the London Race Action Plan being released, and that continues to be worked on so that the Met can move forward in being an anti-racist organisation, but even further than that, working towards being a pro-inclusion organisation. Okay. Similarly. Okay, if I can, I'm mindful of your voice, so if I just answer as quickly as you like, really. Are you using trust and confidence in the Met as an indicator of successful performance following this review? Yeah, we definitely are. Obviously, it was key to. It was key to the Casey review, and through our MOPAC attitude survey that we do regularly, it's positive to hear that confidence is up now by 4%. Really, because public confidence in the Met is at an all-time low. From June 2019 to the most recently available data in December 2024, it's declined from 59% to 46%. Do you think more could have been done to improve that figure? I mean, Kenny can give you the breakdown of the variance in that, because obviously it's important to reflect across different demographics in London. However, I don't think this is something that we can ever, being able to confidently report and feel safe in the police is something that we need to always have an ongoing focus on, and that's been seen in the Mayor's draft police and crime plan as well. But if you want the statistical breakdown, then...
Well, we go by your figures, and these are figures that we've received. They're the only ones that we can get to. The most recently available data was from December 24, and as I repeat, it's declined from 59% to 46%. So that's a worry, isn't it? Because trust and confidence in the police, we want to go up and up and up.
Yeah, so the trust is up by 4 percentage points over the last 12 months, which actually is starting to reverse a longer-term decline seen since about the start of, I think it's the reverse started sort of 2013-14 and going down gradually. So that's actually really positive and trust, and you're right that it is up at 73% now. On confidence, which is about how good a job they do locally, you are right, it's at 46% according to the Public Attitudes Survey. When you look at that is a sort of decline. If you look at that within the context, which I talked about the last time, which I think was one of the things I probably didn't get right in terms of how we framed this previously, is that that's part of a wider decline across policing nationally. And if you look at the Metropolitan Police compared to its comparator forces, it's actually above the national average overall for confidence, and it's above other forces like Greater Manchester Police. That's not to say that more doesn't need to be done.
I think we all need to accept it. It needs to be a lot better than it is now. I mean, that we can agree on.
Yeah, I think we completely agree with that, and that's why it's one of the key priorities in the new police and crime plan.
Okay, well, we'll continue to look at the data that's available to us. The Met accepted the KC review and subsequently published its reform plan, which we call a new Met for London. In the Mayor's most recent budget, there was a £32 million less than anticipated amount for the new Met for London plan when the budget was set in 24-25. So will that impact its progress?
I mean, I think that obviously we all know that the Met has had to make particularly tough choices this year through the budget process. That's because of ongoing underfunding of over £1 billion over a decade. And, the low-hanging fruit, for a lack of a better term, all being taken. So now that we are really in the crux of the situation, we have obviously from that position, when I started, moved significantly on, given that we have had significant landmark funding from the government, including bringing back the NIC and having a ring-fenced neighbourhood grant.
Can I push you on an answer to the question, though? Because a new Met for London was a response to Casey's review and how the Met were going to make it better. The Mayor has constantly said that people's or Londoners' safety is his #1 concern, and it's certainly most of our concerns. So we all accept that. And I've just asked you, though, there's in the most recent budget, there was a £32 million less anticipated to go towards that plan. So will that have an impact on the progress that plan is supposed to make to counteract what Casey found?
I think it's really important that we recognise that neighbourhood policing, public protection and the new Met for London have all been prioritised in the thinking around the budget. So we are conscious that we want to continue to see the progress on new Met for London, and we're prioritising those areas.
If it was put forward as a priority, looks like it's £32 million down. That's not a priority if you lose 32 million, is it?
Well, I think, the Commissioner ourselves all recognise that this budget is particularly difficult. We're not saying that there isn't a spending gap. We all recognise that. However,
so can you answer the question? Would it make a difference?
I'm trying to. I think that we know, and I think it's really important that we carry on working with government to make it clear that, and this is something that the HMIC recognised as well, is that budgetary pressures is a threat to this, but we need to make sure through our prioritisation of the budget and our continual lobbying of the government to make sure that they continue to uplift the funding in policing, that doesn't become an ongoing reality.
We'll move on because I'm not getting a proper answer. Perhaps lobby the mayor. He's got over a £20 billion amount of money that he can deal with. And he has always said policing and people's safety is his number one concern. If it's your number one concern, put your money where your mouth is. So perhaps
he has moved the budget to a quarter of the whole mayor's policing budget. So he has put his money where his mouth is in that, and obviously across the GLA family, the money is short, and he's prioritising in that budget. He's put in 10 million this year, and he's prioritising within that safety budget the things that matter to Londoners, like women's safety, public protection. And
let's move on because there's still a £32 million gap. Baroness Casey recommended that the Met and MOPAC commission an independent review of progress after 2 years. Can you update the committee on the discussions that have been taking place regarding this review, including timescales, the budget and the remit of the review?
Thank you. Yes, obviously we want to take forward all of Baroness Casey's recommendations, and we feel that a review is very important. We feel that it's important that given the importance that even this committee puts on the new Met for London plan, that we take that as the starting point of the work so that we get a full picture of the implementation of that. So we're working towards those timescales, and we're already in active conversations with the Commissioner, myself and the Mayor about the scope and scale and the people involved in that review, so definitely taking that forward.
Okay, so you haven't commissioned the review already? You don't know what money's going into it, who will sit on it?
We need to work through finding the appropriate people and the appropriate agencies to be involved. So once we've done that and talking about the scope and scale, obviously we know that things have moved on significantly since the KC review. We've seen that with the Met coming out of special measures. So it's really important that, you know, Londoners have confidence in that review. So we need to get it right.
Of course. How much money are you putting towards that?
We haven't got to that.
So really, there's nothing so far, basically. You don't know how much money, you don't know who's going to sit on it, you don't know the parameters of it, you don't know when it's coming out.
Well, we have a baseline figure of £250,000 set aside for it. So we're working on those scales, but obviously it's a joint commission.
Okay, and will your final police and crime plan set out exactly how progress will be made over the next 4 years?
In relation to the Casey
in
review.
relation to all the recommendations of Casey, etc.
Yeah, the whole police and crime plan is rooted in our progress against the Casey review.
Okay. Will we get an embargoed copy of the police and crime plan?
Sorry, Chair, I thought you've had it. You've responded to it.
No, the final one.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I'm sure you can do. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay, well, since the other one's coming out on Monday, when can we expect that? Because some of us can't wait to read it, can we? No, really.
I'm glad it's an important strategy.
It is a very important document.
Yeah, exactly. It will be out this week, so I'll make sure that happens.
So we'll get an embargoed copy this week?
Yeah, the deadline's Monday, so definitely.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. The new Met for London plan came with an action plan with a huge number of targets and that were highlighted in the Casey review, and it included timeframes, importantly. So the question is, are you going to look into including progress on the new Met for London plan with all of those targets measurable in the progress report on the Casey review, because the two are inextricably linked?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Assembly Member Roberts. That's why we want to make sure that the timescales reflect that.
Okay, so there's going to be a thorough, this is what's happening with the new Met for London plan embedded within the the review of the Casey?
Yeah, obviously we want to take in the recommendations, the Casey review, what the HMIC have found so far. We wanted to make sure that we're giving Londoners a real sense of the progress made and where the new ongoing challenges are.
Thank you. And one issue that was identified by Baroness Casey in their interim report was that the Director of Professional Standards, or Directorate of Professional Standards in the Met, does not fully command the confidence of officers and staff and requires significant change so to do. What progress has been made on that particular issue?
I mean, Assemblymember Roberts, I think you bringing up the new Met for London plan in this, in your last question, is key to this. So you'll know that the Commissioner has set out high standards within the police as a key principle of what the work is doing, bringing in AC Lawrence Taylor to take forward that work, bringing in a significant amount of training for officers, bringing in the new vetting protocols, you know, and misconduct cases that have seen that has been a huge undertaking, and I think we've seen a lot of positive results. I think the accountability that we're seeing, sadly, in some awful cases, means that the officers are being, the ones that we do not want in the police service are being found, and there is a greater confidence in the standards being held in the Met.
Okay, and just as it was officers themselves that were saying that there was a lack of confidence in the DPS, what will you be doing in order to try to measure the levels of confidence going forward? Will you be either individual reviews, individual surveys, annual reviews?
We have ongoing oversight on the on this area in training, in vetting, in misconduct. MOPAC's officers work very closely with AC Taylor, and we have Karina and Fiona who regularly go to training, regularly look at misconduct cases, are involved in the organisation of the panels.
But it's more the measuring of confidence. I appreciate that these are all the things which will hopefully increase the confidence, but what will you do to satisfy yourself that that trust and confidence is increasing year on year?
I mean, personally, I take it upon myself to regularly talk to officers. I met recently with the Muslim Police Association, the Black Police Association, meet with the unions. I'm always trying to talk to officers when I'm out and about on my visits to get their views on how it feels to be an officer. We had a really good workshop with the London Policing Board with officers to talk about their confidence levels. So.
But that's all very good, but what I'm trying to drive at is something which is measurable, something tangible, something that once a year you can point to and say, last year confidence was 52%, this year it's 58% in the DPS. Because anecdotes is fine, but it's more to do with measurables.
So I agree with that. I think there's the staff survey which the Met has, and we can certainly speak to them about that. I mean, I think our role is less to look at that. That is for the Met to look at and make sure their own officers have confidence in that, than it is for us to assure ourselves that that is working properly as a system. And I think some of the transformation work which has been done by bringing in local standards units into the central thing to make sure that there's a consistency of approach across the Met should help with that. We look at the complaints and sample them so that it's not just about speed in the way that they're dealt with, but it's about the quality which is being driven through, because it's one thing just to clear stuff, it's another thing to make sure it's done properly and effectively, especially if you look at, for example, the Met BPA or black officers. It's about looking, and this isn't about the DPS, but it quite often gets conflated, it's about the disproportionality going into the misconduct actual system. And if you look at the latest figures there, they are down from, I think it was 1.8 times more likely to 1.5. Now that's only 0.3 percentage points, but it is quite a considerable move. That's only just in the last 3 months of last year, so we need to wait and see whether that is actually just a sort of one-off and it reverts to the mean, or whether actually that is the start of something more sustained. That we hope it's the latter. But these are the things which I think we can look at meaningfully in that regard as MOPAC, in which we are actively taking a role in it. I think I take your wider point about you want a measurable objective, but I think from what the Deputy Mayor is saying, And this is what I would recommend to her, that she does that through the staff support associations and the unions and tries to understand from that their representative how it's going on, and that then the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner take the staff survey and look at those issues.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Deputy Mayor, you talked about speaking to the Black Police Association, but the last time I checked, they said that the Met is not a good place for black people to work. It's an unsafe working environment. So what was their take on in your conversation?
I mean, I think it's important to recognise the concerns that the Black Police Association have. I think my meeting with them was very productive. It was about how proud they are to work for the Metropolitan Police, and how they really want to do the best for London, and how we all work together to be in a position where, as I said, the Met have put themselves on a journey to being a pro-inclusion organisation, and the police associations will be key to part of being on that journey. So
I think what I'm getting at is, what assurance did you give the Black Police Association that that MOPAC will be helping? What difference will MOPAC's input make to what from them is a very stark statement? They are proud to work with the Met, that's great, but where's the impact from MOPAC?
I think it's on me to make sure that that I'm readily available for those conversations, that I'm taking those conversations seriously, that I'm reflecting that back to the leadership in the Metropolitan Police, and that we have that feedback loop going forward on the areas of concerns that they have, and that is something that I am actively doing.
Okay, Chair, back to you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you, and good morning, Kenny. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. I wanted to ask you what action has been undertaken to improve the quality of data and recording systems to ensure that disproportionality and misconduct in the Met can be identified and addressed. And I ask that in the context of the previous questions and the point that you have raised, that there are essentially, to be crude, more black people going into the system, and therefore more black officers coming out being disciplined. So that data, what are you doing to improve it? What are you doing with it?
We are working actively on this area. We, as I said, through MOPAC's team of oversight officers, we are actively looking at the complaints about the misconduct. Obviously, we have the Insight review, that E&I Insight research that Kenny just mentioned, where we saw originally that black officers were twice as likely to be, sorry, 1.9, Kenny, sorry. I know. Twice as likely to be put into that system than white officers. I have some assurance that actually from that point, after original referral, how those cases are triaged actually negates that disproportionality. But that aside, it's really important that we work to change those original referrals in the first place to get that disproportionality out of the system. So we're actively working with the Met on that, around their training, around their training for all officers, about how to have good management and leadership training that means that, you know, concerns can be dealt with preventatively. And we regularly are looking at that. As Kenny says, we've seen a small marked improvement in that, but this isn't something that we're going to let go because we know the level of concern around it.
Okay, thank you. So you've mentioned the training that officers are having to try and address that disproportionality for black officers and staff, but I wonder if you can let us know kind of what impact, if any, that has had, because I guess there's an element of if the police can't support their own black officers and staff, then what can they do for black officers? Black Londoners.
I very much take the point, Assembly Member. I think it's important that we do see that improvement, and as I said, the recent evaluation sees a point. It's 1.5 now from 1.9. So we're seeing a small improvement in that. We need to carry on that level of evaluation and pressure in that, because we know how important it is, as you say, not only to the safety of officers within the organisation, but to the safety of Londoners. I wanted to mention Operation Visual, which is also something the police have undertaken to make sure that they're looking not only at like who's coming into the system, but actually who is it within those who are making repeat referrals, and the trends around that, and taking a proactive approach in that. So actively managing those officers.
If I can just sort of respond directly to your question about what evaluation I'm looking at, when's the time. So my question would be, it's a little bit early from that. I actually have quite a lot of confidence in the way the Met has gone about this now, because for the first time they've got a proper theory of change which developed off the back of work that their Strategic Insights unit did, which built on the work that MOPAC Evidence and Insights team did. They've then used that to create a kind of theory of change, and they've based their action plan on that. And that's led to work such as when the initial form comes in from areas outside DPS, which is sort of saying this should go in for misconduct, they might look at that and say, is this actually something that should be being dealt with as a performance issue? Because one hypothesis being that more black officers get referred in for misconduct, and it should be performance. Now, is that starting to have an impact? As I've said, the figures have gone down. We probably need to wait 6-9 months to actually have enough of a base to really be able to look at this and properly say whether that, the training, and what's actually having the causal impact rather than it just being a correlation. But that is exactly the sort of stuff that we are going to be doing and the Met are doing. And they've actually set up, I think it's called the Disproportionality and Misconduct Oversight Group within the Met to have a look at this, which brings together people from across the command structures. And again, I think that's a really positive development. So I'm feeling more hopeful about this area than I have previously.
Okay. I mean, a cynic might say that the actual issue is that there are officers who should be going through misconduct but aren't, and therefore that's how we got to this situation where we needed Casey in the first place. But if I could move on to my next question. So kind of beyond racial disparities and disproportionality in the Met's workforce, what work is being done to understand the impacts of, for example, misogyny on women and homophobia on LGBTQI officers?
I think that's a very good question. I think that if you look at what Casey found in the firearms in 2 of the units, the firearms within the MPS, it's really important that going through that and this is something that the HMIC also pushed through the Peel inspection, was that there was a systematic review of all of the firearms commands, and that's something that has been undertaken. As I mentioned earlier, we've recently visited that unit and heard firsthand from the actually very eloquently from a female officer about the difference that has made, and what they've done in terms of both safety in those units, but also what's been done to encourage more women into those units, especially around particular development courses. So I think that's a real illustration of, taking one of the recommendations from Casey and looking at it in the system approach and applying it.
Thanks. And then, so Baroness Casey, we have in our briefing an excerpt from one of her recommendations, a new independent multidisciplinary team of officers and staff to be brought in to reform misconduct cases and be able to deal with sexual misconduct, domestic abuse and discrimination. Obviously, there are 2 horrific cases that brought about this review, and I think it's the anniversary of Sarah Everard's murder. We're in that period. But for your staff and officers, particularly women and LGBTQ officers, issues around sexual misconduct and domestic abuse, do we have any movement on the number of officers who have allegations against them who are still serving, are still operational? Because I know that the Commissioner has recently, there was a tribunal which unfortunately they met, was not successful in, where they were not able to remove officers that frankly shouldn't be working. So there is still, I assume, there's still that issue and still that body of people in the Met.
So on the first half of your question, Assemblyman Moe, I think it's really important to look at the measures that the Met have put in around obviously Operation Soteria moreover, but Operation Assure within the Metropolitan Police. That means that officers now can report on other officers' misconduct or allegations completely anonymously. So I think that that's a key thing to show, and we have obviously seen a significant increase in the number of officers that have gone through those misconduct cases. I think you rightly point out the terrible situation that the recent judicial review has put the Metropolitan Police in, and I know that when the Commissioner came, Chair, that you rightly spoke strongly on this matter too, that and we need to be unequivocal about it. We need these officers not to be in the Metropolitan Police Service. We all want London to be safer, and it's not safer if they're in there. And so I know that the Commissioner is working actively with our full support to make sure that we work with the Home Office. And in a recent conversation with the Minister, I drove this point home that we need the legislation to close this gap. And I know that that's something that's coming forward. So.
Thank you. Assemblymember Best.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back quickly to the beginning of this meeting, Kenny, where you talked about some of the statistics for trust and confidence across England and Wales and Manchester. Where are you getting your statistics from? Because
Crime Survey for England and Wales, latest publication.
Yeah,
it
which
lags about
shows
3
that
months.
London is way below the national average.
I think London's at 48.6% and the average is 48%. But if I'm wrong, I apologise and I'll write to you.
Okay, well, I just would ask to look again, because I think some of the forces that you were comparing to there, we are actually below, and it seemed a little bit like an excuse for saying that's a really serious matter of trust and confidence here. So let's not try and say, you know, oh, it's not that bad when you look at the rest of the picture. Well, I think even when you look at the rest of the picture, we still don't come out well.
So the reduction in Metropolitan Police as London, sorry, because it encompasses City of London and Police, if you look at it over the last 4 years, has been less than the reduction in confidence across other forces.
I mean, it's starting from a lower base, though. That's the
it
point,
was,
isn't it? I just think any talk like that is completely ignoring the issue we have here in London, and I just.
So that's certainly not what I was doing. I was trying to contextualise what I was saying about it.
I think when we shouldn't really try and contextualise poor performance, especially when the context still shows it's poor performance. Just wanted to come on to the questions we were asking around some of the misconduct cases. And I wondered what work has been done to understand what kind of cases those were, and if there's anything else that that's connecting those cases. For example, because obviously we still the 81% of cases of black officers being more likely to be reported, but also more likely to have those claims substantiated. I wonder, obviously, the police force is becoming more diverse. Is this a new recruit issue? If you look across new recruits, is it something that others aren't getting? Or is there some other kind of linking factor there as to why that's happening?
So if you look at the referrals into the misconduct case, I think I'm going from figures which are maybe 6-9 months out of date here, and I've not got it in my briefings. This is from memory, so again, if I'm wrong, I will write. But
sorry, that was at the time of the Casey report, I meant.
So most of the cases, when you look at them, which go in, the strongest determining factor of that is somebody who is young in service, generally between 0 and 4 years within service, which drives that. And as you know, the recruits at the moment tend to be more diverse, but not necessarily more diverse in terms of black officers per se, because that's only nudged up roughly from a very low base of 3-something% to I think 3.7% in the latest overall stats for London as a whole.
I just wonder when we look at this and we see that obviously I know the challenge board's been created, but still a lot of those claims being substantiated, and I just wonder is there something that's connecting it that we're missing, or is it more to do with the fact that more of these white officers should be getting the allegations, but are being kind of protected by having a long-standing service? But it seems to me there must be something more deep-rooted in that needs to be addressed.
I mean, I think you're right, Assembly Member Best, that we need to make sure that we're getting, across the whole system of tenure, the highest quality. And I think one of the things that the Metropolitan Service has successfully done is the re-vetting work that they've instigated. I think that's important so that you can't, have vetting early on in your career and then, continue not to reach those standards going forward and continue to stay within service. So I think that bringing in the re-vetting is a really important point on the point that you're making. I think that we need to make sure that and that's why the leadership training that I mentioned, I think which is in its 3rd year now, is really important, so that all senior leaders are trained in what the highest standards of management is, so that we can make sure that conduct across all of the Metropolitan Police is rightly addressed.
And how is the challenge panel helping in operation?
Well, I mean, Kenny might want to give more detail, but I think it's a really important part of challenge and oversight within what we're seeing, and it's posing the questions like you have just there, Assembly Member Best, like what are we seeing in terms of tenure, what are we seeing in terms of the key themes from those allegations. I think it's also really important that we work with outside oversight bodies in this as well, so the regular meetings we have with the IOPC, with the HMIC, so that we can look at where the cross recommendations through what we're seeing in the misconduct cases, and actually are those recommendations being applied across the Metropolitan Police Service, because if we found it in a number of officers, then it's a wider systemic issue.
And just one final kind of comment really, but to see what you're doing about it. One of the issues senior officers have been raising is now obviously is a culture of higher reporting with more lines to report people, and mixed with the virtual working, they're seeing a lot more reporting in their teams for what perhaps should be more mundane issues dealt with by supervisors. So for example, I think that somebody was rude to me in email. I can imagine as police officers that probably picked a career not to be behind a computer. I imagine a lot of police officers could be probably quite curt in email, but how do we now, addressing the balance of what's been under-reporting in the past, try and get to a point where there isn't this over-reporting or people not dealing with, normal perhaps office disagreements or difference of working and clogging up the system in that way?
I mean, overall, I think it's the consistency of that training is really important, so that the standards expected are, universally understood, and whether that's first-line training when people are recruited into the Met or ongoing supervision and management training. That's why that's important, so that it can be, which is why what we're seeing in the referrals and how that's triaged is also important, because we need to make sure that we're not over policing the police, if you will. Kenny, what were you saying about the report?
So I think there's two things. One is the training, which the Deputy Mayor referred to, and actually giving people the confidence to tackle these as performance issues rather than... Because if you think about it, if you're a police officer, in many ways, Path says it's a bit easier to throw this over the fence, isn't it, and have somebody else look at this from the professional standards and actually tackle performance issue or resolve an issue yourself. So I don't disagree with where you were going with that. Secondly, that is what I was talking about earlier in terms of when the M1 form comes into the reporting form for the thing, that's the new triage system where the professional standards team will look at it and say, is this actually misconduct? And if it's not, they'll then refer that back. If they see a pattern of that, they'll then go and speak to people in that OCA or BCU and sort of say, look, what's going on here, etc., etc. So that speaks exactly to the point you were making, I think.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbutt.
Thanks. I've just got a couple of points of clarity quickly and then a question. The earlier, Deputy Mayor, you mentioned that in terms of disproportionality and misconduct, that it isn't an issue after triage. So Casey found that black officers are more likely to have an allegation against them substantiated. So is that not the case anymore?
I mean, so Kenny can give you the actual breakdown of how it works through the system, but in my assurance meetings with AC Taylor, that's what he was explaining to me, that through the triaging of, as Kenny just said, is this actually just a performance issue? Is this a serious misconduct issue? Does this need to be taken forward? That disproportionality doesn't continue to be found. And I think that's important. I mean, as I said to Assemblyman, it's important that actually the issue of referrals is tackled, because that in itself is a problem. But it's good to know that disproportionality doesn't continue in the outcomes of those cases, and that's an improvement.
So it's a bit of a weird one in that both those statements are true at the same time. But the reason that black officers are statistically more likely to have a misconduct allegation upheld against them is because there are more allegations made against them. So if you follow that through, once they get into the system, if you then take that as your control point, they're statistically no more or less likely to have the misconduct held once they're in the system, because more of them proportionately go into the system. They are, of course, even if statistically no more of them come out of the system, they are still statistically more likely to have a misconduct allegation upheld against them against the officer base as a whole. So it's a slightly weird one. But once you're in the system itself, we don't find it to be disproportionate.
Okay, that's bits reassuring. And Assemblymember Mwema raised the independent multidisciplinary team. Does that exist?
So what's happened on that is there is DASA, which actually Baroness Casey was very complimentary of in her report and suggested was a good model. That has been extended to not just look at the current, but look at some of the historic cases as well, which has come out Evonik as a whole. They've set up the new independent team to look at VISSL, which is sorry, that might not be the right name, but whatever I think it is VISSL. Sorry, okay, it is, which is going to be looking at the old cases of discrimination, which I think is starting looking at the last 5 years, which will look at issues which were raised earlier around LGBT.
So it does, yeah, so great. So there's
that's
some
underway.
Progress on that one. I just wanted to talk about institutional homophobia. So I've been made aware of a case of Heklina, who had an unexplained death 2 years ago, and there's been a lack of police response or investigation. So I just wanted to ask how you're ensuring that there's no homophobic bias and discrimination in policing.
Just to clarify, do you mean in London?
Yeah.
Or, okay. Yeah, I think there's that this is a piece of ongoing work that we need to tackle and make sure that it's really important to us that everyone in London has complete trust and confidence when they need the police, that they will get the service that they deserve. So this is a piece of work. I mean, we've seen some really important work done through the London Race Action Plan, the Stop and Search Charter that I mentioned previously, but I do think that we need a greater assurance in this area.
I mean, I think you're light on what's actually a really important area, not just within the force, but outside the force. If you look at what's happened over the last 4 years in terms of the major changes, the biggest sort of falls, and now the people with the lowest trust, the lowest confidence, and the lowest sort of concept that will be treated fairly by the Met across the piece are LGBTQ+ Londoners. And that, I think, is a real concern. Now, you have the officers on every borough that look at that. We obviously did our HMICFRS report following the horrific murders committed by Stephen Port. They have looked at the Met at some of the issues surrounding that, around chemsex and all of those things. it is part of their internal culture plan, how to bring about all of this. Again, once the staff survey results are there, it will be interesting to have a look and see whether there is that difference within the Met, how many people feel comfortable identifying as LGBT when they're actually within the Met, all of those sort of issues, and speaking to the sort of staff support associations. But I do think it's a really, really important issue at the moment.
So, Stephen, that's really, I mean, I think we've recognised there's probably a lot more to do. So were all the lessons learned and implemented following the Stephen Port inquiry?
So it wasn't an inquiry, it was an investigation by HMIC FRS, and it was around the sudden death investigations. The Met has taken a lot of them forward. Yes, a large part of the issues was about the young and service officers, and actually about the clarity around how people conduct themselves when they are just turning up at one of those death scenes, and the connections which were then made between the deaths when they have multiple investigative teams on them. I know the Met has looked at that and has taken it very seriously, yes.
But Assembly Member Garbutt, I think it's really important. When we did the consultation for the policing crime plan, I met with representatives from LGBTQ+ organisations, and just to reiterate Kenny's point about the low trust and confidence, it was stark, and we're talking about big organisations including Gallup, Stonewall, and Black Pride and others. So I think that there is a lot more to be done in that space.
And do you think the Met Commissioner recognises that?
It's definitely something we've talked about. So, but we need to be making sure that we're seeing assurance of that action throughout the system.
Okay, thank you. I had a quick question just on the Met Strategic Insight Unit to understand the drivers and factors. That was understanding the drivers and factors of disproportionality. Has that been completed, and the research that it's been doing, and what are some key findings?
Yes, that's what has driven the work which has been done within the Met on this now, and that's, for example, what has started to drive the idea about the triaging around the forms which comes in. It's what's led to the disproportionality misconduct oversight group. It's the whole theory of change which has developed beyond that, which is really the first time that the Met have done that, which is why I've got more confidence that this is going in the right direction.
Thanks. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. We're running horribly late already. Assembly Member Duval for a little question.
Drivers for Change, Casey, 2 years on. We had two important reports. Casey's review, New Met for London, and there's probably a few others that have influenced some of the work and the agendas now. In 2 years on, MOPAC, the review of MOPAC wasn't done 2 years ago, right? I'm a fan of MOPAC, but should we not be doing a review somehow about where do you fit into the work, the new work and the change agenda? Clearly you've been doing it for 2 years and you've been there holding hands or whatever, but does it not require some review of your organisation in a friendly way, not in a hostile way, my question is? Secondly, the new policing board is not so new now, but it has been in operation around that. Casey had a different view of that policing board, which was to drive change around some of the review issues. And of course, New Met for London comes on to drive that. I just get the feeling about the new policing board, and again, I don't mind new people on the agenda for that oversight issue that you earlier said, Kyle, that's needed in different levels, some of external, some internal, to drive change. But I do get the feeling that the policing board's taken on a bit of a new life other than Casey or New Met for London in terms of the agenda. And I get the feeling that actually it's a bit unfocused. I might be unfair in that, but I don't mind a debate. I don't mind a debate with the policing board about that, given where, the experience that I've had from the Metropolitan Police Authority onwards. But I just question whether we've got the right focus in driving change from Casey 2 years on. Of course, everyone accepts nothing happens overnight, but in terms of the drive, and we've already seen some slippage in terms of the resources available for the agenda. That happens, right? So it doesn't mean it's bad and nothing is going to happen, but we continue on this path. But is the focus still on the change agenda around that policing board? Should we at some stage be considering part of Casey Part 2 a review of the policing board's activities. So I'd welcome your views.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Thank you. So on MOPAC, I think obviously as a relative, I'm not that new anymore either, but as a relative new deputy mayor in that, I've been obviously meeting with all the teams, understanding what they do, looking at things about what works well, what needs to change, and gathering all of that insight alongside with the interim CEO. I think we've moved forward in particularly our oversight review we've been doing currently to have a more structured way of having oversight and also what that means in terms of the relationship with the Metropolitan Police, but also with our external partners. So those are the pieces of work that we're actively taking forward. You'll know, Len, that we're at the moment in the middle of recruiting our new CEO. So I think that there will be a period where they come in and we obviously have things on the table at the moment that we want to work through with the CEO, but also giving her the opportunity to do that. We can look at whether that, a review would be helpful. I always think an external pair of eyes is we want to be a learning organisation. Obviously, the individual pieces of work, we obviously regularly work with partners to challenge ourselves in that. On the London Policing Board, there is going to be a review undertaken, but also to give you that assurance on the structure of the board. Obviously, you know that there's the board that meets quarterly, chaired by the mayor, but also there's the two subcommittees and finance and performance and culture subcommittees. And in those subcommittees, all of the questions asked are framed around the Casey review. So it's very clearly linked to that work, but also it's good to know that we're also working with the London Policing Board on an annual review. So I'm hopeful that maybe that gives you the clarity you need. But yes, that review will be happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think the clarity we would like is to see the end of the London Policing Board so that we end up getting policemen back into these meetings that can answer operational questions that we would like to put to you that we can't. But anyway, we've got to move on and we're running short of time. So we're now going to talk about volume crime. If I can ask that your answers are as concise as they can be, please. We're really running very, very late. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate the words of Assemblymember Duval, I do think it is time for MOPAC to have a review. I would have used the words fair, not friendly review. But there you go. Can you provide us with an update on the launch of the antisocial behaviour mediation pilot?
The antisocial mediation pilot is it hasn't started yet. It's under procurement. We're working up the terms and references for taking that procurement forward. We're conscious as well now that the policing crime bill has particular focus on, rightly, on ASB. So we want to make sure that the work that we procure in that area aligns with that.
You stated in your Q3 performance review that the pilot would be delayed. What was the reasons for that?
There's internal governance issues at Southwark, which have meant we've been unable to progress with the pilot in the form that we originally envisaged.
Let me take a slightly different. Let me go a slightly different way. The Mayor's manifesto states that he will support the Met to take tougher action against the perpetrators of burglary, theft and robbery. I say that because I think these things stem from antisocial behaviour, and this is the most serious expression of that. So, Deputy Mayor, how is this practically being delivered? How are you delivering on these measures that the Mayor wanted?
So you rightly, we talk about these areas, and that's why we've invested over £1 billion to make sure that we're getting that right. For example, we know that burglary has been down by a fifth in London since 2016. We do know, however, that other inquisitive offences have seen increases since the pandemic, and we know that really that this really affects people, Londoners' sense of trust and confidence in the police. So we are, you know, you'll see in the police and crime plan that confident communities is a key priority for us, and the work we've been doing with partners through the Robbery Reduction Partnership Group, which involves the Met, obviously, London Councils, CPS, Youth Offending Service, TfL, the Safer Business Network, the Violence Reduction Unit, and the BTP is a really important grouping where we get all the agencies together so that we can really look at the multiplicities of reducing that high volume crime. It's something that that board met a couple of weeks ago. Oh, it was last week, I knew. It was last week, and it's something that partners spoke really positively about and want to continue, because we all know that this partnership working is having an effect. You know, we've seen really good pilots come out of it. I know we'll go on to talk about some of those later, but it's important to show that the work around the violent volume crime team investigation team has come out of a pilot, 2 pilots in Bromley, Croydon and Sutton, and Lambeth and Southwark, which has shown a significant improvements in caseloads. And I know we'll probably come on to that in a bit, but...
Let me just focus you slightly here, because there has been an absolutely staggering rise in phone theft, particularly under the mayor, a real staggering rise, and that is something that makes people feel unsafe, because we all unfortunately have these phones in our pockets. You've spoken a little bit about partnership work to address this, which seems like a good way forward, but what I'm worried about is that people are happy with the meetings. What are the outcomes of these meetings? What are the deliverables? And to go back to something that Assembly Member Roberts said, what is the measurable, what is the KPI, the stat to measure, or suite of stats to measure there is some progress happening here?
Yeah, I think you rightly raised a really important point about phone thefts, and I know when AC Twist was here, he talked a lot about the work they're doing in this space. It's also really, the mayor has taken the phone companies really into this space in conversations about how we design out crime in this area. We've seen really positive movements from Google in the work that they've been doing around this, as well as Apple in the kind of limitation devices that they're putting on the phone. Ultimately, we know that when we're talking about the volumes that we're talking about, and they are significant, no one is denying that, 80,000 at the last count. Sorry, Joe. You know, we are talking about an industry, and so it's really important that we use all the tools in our arsenal to crack that industry.
I accept that, and when challenged, the mayor talked about what he'd asked the mobile phone companies to do. I happen to agree that's the right step. Affecting the business model of a crime is always useful, but what I want to focus on here is what are MOPAC doing for its partnerships. Again, one of the worries when you deal with public realm stuff is that we have lots of meetings, but what do we do? What do we actually do? What new mechanism is in there? What new revelation are we all acting? What is MOPAC driving the police to do, or supporting the police to do, to make a difference to the feeling of safety on the streets, particularly around phone theft?
It's important that those meetings of those partners do happen, because, for example, the last meeting we had a representative from the Business Partnership Organisation across London who actually gave the really important insight that gyms were reporting to her a significant problem with people coming out of the gym, and the first thing they do is obviously get their phone out. And they actively want to work with us, the gyms, to work out how they can stop that from happening, because it's obviously distressing for their customers. It's things like that, getting that insight, but also it's really important collaborative operations that come out of it, like the operation that we've had with the CPS, working on early charging decisions in those two areas I've mentioned, because it's not only making sure that those arrests happen, but that those charges are taken so that there is swift justice for these high volume crimes. So
see, that's good. That's the kind of thing I want to talk about, an actual tangible offering. Let me just take another slight tack as my final question. In the Mayor's manifesto, he talked about making London greener, safer, fairer, all the things that anybody would say. But he talked about, in particular, 500 extra neighbourhood police community support officers. Has that happened? And are you happy with the level of community officers you have currently? So
in the last year alone, so since March 24, we had do you mean on PCSOs? Your
yes,
question
PCSOs, police.
So that was 748. We're up to 1,000 now, so that's already an increase of 252. And you'll see from the policing crime plan, the work that we're doing with government, that neighbourhood policing is the key priority area that we all align on.
Just to be clear, we haven't seen the policing crime plan yet, so we haven't seen that. And I'm asking, have you reached your 500? No.
So we haven't reached it. That's part of what we will aim to achieve.
Is this increase you've had, because I accept you can't just magic up 500 people?
Yeah, we have had an increase.
But is this in line with the pace you imagined?
I mean, it's on the trajectory which I think we discussed with the Commissioner about 12 months ago or so, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chair, back to you.
The supplementary has fallen. Did you want to ask any more on question 7? Because you've actually covered all of that quite brilliantly in its own
I want
way.
you to going to give you the space to move on, Mayor. I think, Mayor, sorry.
No, you call me Mayor if you like.
I would have loved to.
I don't mind. I would have loved to. Right, Assembly Member Best.
What is the remit of the Met's volume crime teams, and how do they work alongside and complement the other teams?
I think this is a really important move forward in tackling volume crime. So obviously this is a pretty operational question, but I think earlier this week we were talking about knife-enabled crime, and it was important to hear from the Metropolitan Police about how these crime teams will be used to increase the investigational powers of the high volume crimes. So the idea is similar to what we've seen in public protection, that we have officers on the street bringing forward that those allegations and those victims of crime, and then we have a dedicated high volume crime team taking forward those investigations, because we need to see the improvement in identification of suspects, and having strength in case files that take them forward. So I think that this is a really positive thing that's come out of, as I said, 2 BCU areas that we're hoping will be applied across London, and we will start to see significant movement in the volume crime because of it.
And just so the main changes, it will be a move from response to local investigation teams, which will bring everything together under PIP 1 level investigators. They will then work, and it will avoid the sort of crime-specific approach which has gone before, to dealing with the ones which they believe within there are resolvable. They will work very closely with the local crime management units. You asked about how it links in with the other teams. So the crime management units are new, and so that move will happen, I think, by the end of spring. Then they work with the crime management units, which is a new thing which came in at the end of last year, which is in response to the 2024 Peel investigation, which is to do with whether crimes are actually properly allowed to proceed, if I can put it that way, or whether they're closed because there's no realistic chance of getting a positive outcome on them. That has seen the Met move more in line with national practice, and, for example, rather than 4,000 of those being not proceeded with last September. I think it was something like 10,000 in December. That means that, one, there should actually be a more reasonable caseload for people, so you have a higher percentage chance of a positive outcome. And in many ways, what we've seen from the victim surveys is that that should be better for victims as well, because they're not left with this kind of idea that this case is ongoing, that their expectations are properly managed, and we see that actually having the proper expectation management and your case handled appropriately is what drives victim satisfaction to some levels.
Thanks. When we look at some of those high volume crimes, the stats are obviously pretty scary for this last year. So I know Assembly Member Bailey talked about it a bit, but 35% increase in shoplifting, from theft from a person, shoplifting by 54%, business robbery 70%. Do you think that we aren't going to see that exponential rise next year? Are you confident of that?
I'm confident in that we're, we really recognise that this is the area that most affects communities, and I know that the Commissioner spoke last time he was here about how, because of the prioritisation of other areas, getting that right, this has sadly not been the focus, and I am confident now that we are giving this a really strong focus, and that this is something that, obviously, with the new legislation being brought in, particularly around protection for retail workers, ASB offences and others, that we have a real galvanisation around this high volume community safety issue, and we're going. This is the area I'm most passionate about getting right. So we're going to really make sure that we're on the forefront of doing that through partnerships, but also continue challenge of companies and the Metropolitan Police to drive this forward.
Thanks. And I'm really glad that you recognise it hasn't been a priority and it hasn't been focused on, because I think obviously the first step to actually getting on top of this is realising why a problem occurred in the first place. And that was because these sorts of crimes have been ignored in London. So I'm really pleased to hear you at least recognise that we need to change focus and put this as a priority.
I mean, even the Commissioner spoke about it. So,
yeah, I commend you for recognising that it's been not prioritised. What I would my concern with some of this, especially with the high volume crime we haven't spoken about yet, and it links to the mobile phone thefts, is the fraud and cybercrime and the victim support. How are you making sure that for those high volume crimes around, obviously, I think you were saying, Kenny, where it's not about looking at the specific crime, but trying to look more at the wider picture. But of course, at every end of that is a victim that now, in many cases, is quite vulnerable and doesn't know how to reclaim their digital identity. How are we helping with that?
So there's a couple of things I would say. So first, although this is a high volume crime, obviously reporting is done into the City of London Police generally via this. I've just totally forgotten the name of the reporting system for it all, but anyway, apologies, that will come back, and then it comes out via dissemination from the City of London to the most appropriate force, which is then investigated by an appropriate team under the specialist crime unit team in the Met. So it's a slightly different perspective in terms of the investigations overall, and the Met has proportionately the same number as other forces to deal with. I think in terms of the support for the victims, they can go in via the London Victim and Witness Service and can be supported and get support through that.
I think the kind of one thing you would hear from victims is perhaps that support isn't quite enough. But one thing that we had done in London, and I fully commend the Mayor for investing in it, is the cyber helpline and getting that additional support from cyber experts. But of course, as you'll know, that is shortly going to be decommissioned. Claire, what representation can you make to the Mayor to invest that £85,000 that the cyber helpline needs to continue, whilst you can discuss and negotiate with the Ministry of Justice to give you the funding that they've taken?
I mean, we constantly lobby for more funding from government. I can give you that assurance, Assembly Member Bess. I think, we do, and I know that this is something that the committee feel strongly about. We do have to make sure that we're being as efficient and as effective as an organisation as we can be, and sometimes that means, you know, not being able to fund everything we'd like to. I know
you recognise it's £85,000 though, and I could draw you a long list of things we spend £85,000 on, which makes this look a bit ridiculous. I mean, as part of the Oversight Committee, I just signed off £15,000 for a coat of arms. I'd rather have victims getting the support they need than the GLA have a coat of arms, to be quite frank with you. There's other things like that in your directorate that could be better funded on an actual service.
I think it's also important to recognise that that provision will still be there, that we have, you know, that we have worked with that organisation and we've supported that organisation, but sometimes that we can't continue to fund everything, and so we've had to take that difficult choice. Obviously, you know, if we get a uplift in funding, we can look at it again, but you know, that we have to make difficult choices sometimes.
Okay. Have all Met investigators been trained in how to deal with volume crime? And is there any impact you can tell us about from that training?
Investigators should have their PIP investigations when they do the volume crime investigations, yes.
Is there any impact you can tell us about that training?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay. Are there any plans to update that training, or are you happy with how it is?
So it's a College of Policing issue in terms of that you would need to put to them, whether they were planning to do that and whether there was any Met specificity that they were going to add afterwards.
Although I would say at the same knife-enabled robbery meeting I was at the other day, that the Policing Crime College did talk passionately about this area and making sure that they have the highest standards of guidelines, and that they do actively want to work with the Met, obviously through the violent crime teams, but also making sure that the standards for all officers are kept up to date.
Okay, thank you. I would just make the plug again, Kaya, that you look back at that, how we can better support victims, especially of cybercrime, where there's a dearth of services for them.
I assure you, Assembly Member Best, that support for victims is, as you know, something that we are deeply passionate about. You know, the Mayor continues to fund a victim commissioner to...
So let's not cut the services to them.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps you'll look into that. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Kenny. Good morning, Deputy Mayor. How is MOPAC evaluating the work of the Robbery Reduction Partnership?
Well, we've just actually undertaken that work, which I'm very relieved and proud to say that all of the partners found it a really valuable board, and that we'll continue to meet as a board and think about how we strengthen it, especially given our new prioritisation in the policing crime plan of that. So we've just undertaken that evaluation. I think the good thing about it is that it not only talks about what has gone well as a board, but also what they'd like to see more of. So the partners talked a lot about how they want to see better use of data in what they're seeing across the partnership. So that's something that we're going to take forward.
When it comes to robbery, mobile phone theft is obviously incredibly important. 40% of all mobile phone theft in London happens in Westminster and the West End, in my constituency, so it's a massive issue. We've spoken about what the Mayor's done working with mobile phone companies. What's kind of come next from that work? And what more is kind of needed from other agencies and the government to be able to support the Met to drive down the scourge of mobile phone theft?
Thank you. And I think also, if I may, the partnerships with local authorities and Westminster Council being a key partner in this. They sit on the Robbery Reduction Partnership, but also I know obviously that the Mayor is looking at improving, not the Mayor, sorry, the leader of the Council, Councillor Huck, is looking at improving CCTV in the area, funding and uplifting police in the area, and so that's a way that we can work in partnership to really drive down those things. Obviously, we will continue to push the phone companies on the IMEI number kill switch, for lack of a better term. We know that that is, working with the police, everyone is in agreement, the police and the Mayor's office, that that is the number one thing that would reduce the scale of that, because you wouldn't be able to reconnect it to the cloud, and therefore the international pull of the industry that we're seeing would be hit significantly. You'll also see that the Crime and Police Bill brings in additional powers on tackling this issue. So if we can track those EMI numbers using intelligence, we can really take to the heart of that. And you will have, I hope you've seen the Met's publicity through X on what they've been doing on phone thefts more recently, really showed through Operation Reckoning how they tackled a huge volume of phone thefts. And so it's really important that we, when they do positive operations like that, that we amplify that. They're going to be doing that again in the spring. So amplify the ones that they've done, but also let's keep going with that, because we know that this is a key issue for London, and we want to get it right.
Thank you very much for that response. And you mentioned the crime bill. The crime bill has the intention to lift the requirement of a warrant when a phone is tracked to a premises. So what are MOPEC and the Met's plans around that?
It's obviously the bill is in its earliest stages. The committees are still being set up. I think they've had one meeting so far. So it's really important that we get the details of that legislation and what it means, and therefore we can, work through that together in MOPAC, but also with the police.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, volume crime is clearly the thing that affects the most people. I'm glad the Commissioner last time did accept that it needed more attention, but equally, since then, we've had a reduction in money. So it's something that I think this committee will keep an eye on. We'll also write to you, because Assembly Member Best, quite rightfully, and all of us are concerned about this cybercrime issue. We'll put it in writing to you and see what response we can get back. I think that would be helpful. We're now moving on to neighbourhood policing, and well done everybody, we've caught up on our time. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. The new Met for London plan states that by October 2023, every ward will have at least 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO. Have we achieved this?
Latest figures show that there's 93% compliant.
Okay, and when do we expect to make up the shortfall?
I mean, with the new government funding on neighbourhood officers, with the things that we're working through in the budget, I can, hand on the heart say that is think policing is the key prioritisation area. So we expect to continue to see an uplift.
By when?
I think you should continue to see an uplift, and actually if you look at the numbers of DWOs and PCSOs as a whole over the last 12 months, those have increased. I mean, I was going to use the word exponentially, but it's a dangerous word to use, but they've increased considerably over the last year, over 200, I think it's 252 extra PCSOs within those teams, and I think it's an extra 400 odd extra DWOs. Now, many of the wards have more than 2, 1 as a mix. I just suspect you'll never get to 100%, and the reason I say that is because when people leave, then it will take a little bit of a time to replace them if it is a ward which just is 2 and 1, because it's
then why did the plan, if it was never going to be 100%, then why did the plan state, I mean, quite clearly, every ward will have 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO? Well, and by October 2023, so we're now 6 months on from that target being met, and I appreciate it's only 7%, but if we're talking about trust and confidence, if we're talking about people being able to say, we're happy with the direction of travel, if you're putting up impossible targets, then it's probably best not to put. At least 90% would have been the more honest approach, surely.
Well, I mean, I think it's important that the new Met for London, it reiterates the standards that it wants to see, and its prioritisation of neighbourhood policing is key to that. And I mean, as a previous local authority leader, and the ward councillor, when we had officers, down to a tiny amount, we saw the impact that that's had, and we know that PCSOs, like the PCSO I met in Barnet last Friday, had been on that patch for 20 years. They are key to literally the community's ability to keep itself safe, right? So we are all very keen to do the uplift. I think that we've seen, seeing 322 more DWOs, seeing 252 more PCSOs in a year, and the fact that we know that the government has doubled its funding in neighbourhood policing, that we know that the Met is keen to take that fully up. We know that we're working through the budget with a key prioritisation, that we are going to do that. I think what Kenny meant, when he's talking about the functional operation of when someone leaves, that is just factual.
There's always going to be a certain amount of attrition and new people coming in, people going out. But when we, as either when we as a body, or whether MOPAC or whether it's the Met, have a pledge, for want of a better word, in the document saying by this particular date every ward will have this, and it's not met, then you will appreciate surely that there's going to be some concerns raised. You should stick to the promises made.
I think we need to make sure that every area has the allocation to be able to do that, and that's what will happen. Well, I don't think that. To say that I think what I certainly, in the area that I live in, is what people want to see is a named DWO and PCSO that they can have an ongoing relationship with, that they can have trust and confidence in, and that's the principle that we're working with. Okay.
Just on the question which I asked you, Deputy Mayor, at I think not the last one, but the last time we had one of these conversations, it was the 1,300 additional neighbourhood officers and PCSOs for London, which were promised in the Mayor's manifesto by the end of the thing. Will we have those additional 1,300 officers guaranteed delivered?
I mean, we're in active conversations with the government, especially around the upcoming spending review. We're unequivocally clear in our submissions in that area that policing in London, safety of London, as the Mayor talks about, is our number one priority. We have to get it right, and policing numbers is part of that, and we've got the figures to evidence what we need, and we're moving forward with that lobbying. I know that, as we are, we have that ambition, we want to take that ambition
but that
forward.
Wasn't in the manifesto. It wasn't an ambition to have. It was 1,300 extra officers and PCSUs on London streets. Not an ambition to have. Yeah. Not having conversations with, not driving towards. It was 1,300 extra. And it was a pledge. It was in the top 10. It was number one on the police and crime part of his manifesto.
And that shows the prioritisation the Mayor gives to it. But we have said, like I've just said, that we're already in a year seeing an uplift in officers, that we're taking that forward. So that is our ambition. We're going to, I'm showing you that we're doing that. We're getting the money from government. We've seen that uplift. We continue to move and work forward and make that, Katie, we're working on it.
Okay, fair enough. So you won't guarantee that we'll have them by the end of the Parliament. That's fine, not the Parliament, by the end of this term. I mean, I've asked you quite a few times on this, will you guarantee we will have those additional officers? And each time, a slight move towards the answer, but not the actual answer of yes. But there we go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, all we are looking for is a yes to a manifesto commitment. Assembly Member Best.
Oh, thank you. I thought it was a supplementary. Just as I think it's worth pointing out as well that it's not actually now it's not the figure. Sorry, it's not actually 1,300 officers we need. It's now 2,779 given this last budget. So I do hope that you are still working towards that target, Kaya. I just wanted to ask a supplementary question on the dedicated ward officers. When somebody's in long-term sick, how quickly can we fulfil those positions, and how are the boroughs or the borough commanders working to make sure that we can Because it's a very unique position, I think, those feet on the ground. What are we doing
So
there?
long-term abstractions wouldn't actually count towards your DWO number. That's so, for example, if somebody was a DWO but then they were off on long-term sick, that would count as a long-term abstraction, so it wouldn't be included in the fulfilment of the numbers. And the Met, as I understand it, would look to backfill that. I don't have the exact trigger at what that would happen. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted in the actual progress. I know not so much the figures or whether it counts as figures or not. I just think on the ground, when you have a long-term sickness or perhaps maternity leave, something like that, how are we fulfilling those roles? Because I think, Kai, you spoke about the officer you met in Barnet with 20 years on the ground. Those people really are the heart. They're the people that the community trusts, people that might not speak to the police normally would speak to that person. And I just wondered how we were dealing with that in terms of neighbourhood policing.
Yeah, I think obviously, Assembly Member Best, I completely agree with you on the importance of them, and I know the Met does put similar importance of it. Obviously, if someone's on maternity leave, you have a greater time to plan towards that. It's different if someone becomes suddenly sick, and there's some flex in that, but they definitely have the same level of prioritisation on it.
Okay. Anecdotally, just wanted to say, anecdotally, it feels like it's kind of just left, and well, when they're back, they're back, and you'll have them. But that's why I wondered what the process was. But I'll just leave it there.
Assembly Member Garbutt.
Thank you. Just a quick question on some of the changes in neighbourhood policing linked to the police in schools. And we were informed of changes through a committee report to the Children Affected by Violence report that this committee did. And I understand this new approach is being rolled out, but my concern, and I just wondered what the oversight was from MOPAC and you as Deputy Mayor on this. So the work started in Hackney. There's concern from black-leg youth groups about the lack of co-design with them and young people. It hasn't been rolled out in Hackney. It hasn't had an evaluation, yet in a report it's being said that it's a new approach across London. So I just wondered what the oversight you've had of that change.
So on the original change?
On this change that was reported to us in this committee report, that police will not be stationed in schools, but they will be in the neighbourhood teams and a collection. And I understand it will be on a points-based system, and they can pick the schools can pick activities. But obviously, like I said, it hasn't had enough consultation and it hasn't been evaluated yet. It seems to be being rolled out. So I just wondered what the oversight you've had.
Okay, so it's an operational decision, but I was briefed on the change. I think it's an important change. I think it's really important. We were just discussing high volume crime earlier. One of the things that I hear often is concerns around post after school muggings and so it's really important that police officers are in neighbourhoods making sure they're tackling issues like that. It was something I was very clear with the officers on when they briefed me, that having relationships, trusted relationships with young people is important. I know from my own youth committee in Islington that one of the youth councillors talked passionately about having a good relationship with her school's officer and how important that is. So it continues to be important that these dedicated ward officers are now called dedicated ward officers. Children and young people's role. I hope maybe they'll change that with consultation.
I think people are less concerned about the corridor bit and people coming to and from school. I've heard from youth groups that that's less of the concern. It's more the bit about what they'll still be doing in schools and just a lack of oversight of that bit, but maybe we can pick it up outside.
I mean, I do know that they are, we're happy to talk more about it, but that they are obviously actively still going to obviously have regular contact with schools and deliver some sessions, but we can get you the details about
things
that.
like turning up at school parents' evening and things I've heard. So there's just a bit of concern about what they'll still be doing.
Okay, let's work that through.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. You may not have the answer to this because it's partly a question about what the Met are doing, and I think I've gathered that this piece of work is not yet complete. But has the Met yet set out how it's going to prioritise the use of the additional funding? Because obviously you just mentioned the government announced an extra 100 million before Christmas and another extra 100 million was announced at the end of January. Do we yet have a view from the Met about how they're planning to use extra cash?
Assembly Member Cooper, you've rightly illustrated how the money slightly came in tranches, and therefore we haven't been able to. Now we are in a situation where we have all the funding, and we're working through those kind of allocations based on what we knew previously, what we knew in the tough choices, and how that lands. But we haven't finalised those decisions yet.
Okay, so I'm gathering from what you just said when you said we, that obviously MOPAC is being involved in that prioritisation, and we're talking about neighbourhood teams here, and I hear you saying, I mean, I think almost everybody around the table, with a couple of exceptions, is a councillor as well as an assembly member. So we are very keen to see neighbourhood policing strengthened. So I just wondered what input MOPAC has had, and have you been able to put in a strong word for more resources for those very strong community-linked officers?
So obviously, MOPAC's role is, I mean, it's the MOPAC budget. So we're the holders of the budget, and we give the grant to do that, as well as the Home Office. But obviously the Commissioner has operational freedom. I have to say, I found it to be a very collaborative way that we've worked through things, and what's important is what you say is about that prioritisation. So I want to be unequivocal in the fact that I've been very strong that neighbourhood policing, public protection, which obviously is child and female abuse, and carrying on with working on reforms to improve trust and confidence are the top three priorities that we have been clear on. So I want to give you that assurance, Assembly Member Cooper, that neighbourhood policing is definitely there.
Okay, and any idea when the Met will have finished doing that prioritisation?
Well, what I will say is obviously the budget is imminent to come out, but the allocations, we're talking about obviously huge scales here, and I think it's right, and the Mayor said recently it's really important that they get that level of scale of change right. So we don't want to be in a situation where we're, pushing for them to do X and Y and Z, fast. We need to make sure that that they feel comfortable, that they've worked through those options and the mitigations and everything that goes with it.
Okay, but I'm hoping that the borough commanders, the BCU commanders, are all going to be very clear about what they should be doing going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
MOPAC's budget guidance states that the youth engagement and diversion officers will be removed from removed. How will MOPAC ensure that neighbourhood policing is engaging young people in London?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really important that we get that engagement right, and the development of the new dedicated ward officers that are youth-centred should be done in collaboration with children and young people. I think they've done this really positively through the work around the children's strategy, and I know we're hopefully going to discuss it later, but the Stop and Search Charter, so they can do co-production and engagement well with young people, and I hope they'll take the opportunity to do it with this new ward officer role.
But if you say it's important, you have to get beyond hoping that they'll do it important and give some kind of framework. Because the Mayor's budget guidance states that the reduction in youth engagement diversion officers is the Met stated that because YEDs do not meet the requirement of core policing purpose. So with that in mind, somebody will need to do something significant in order to retain engagement, because the Met are quite clearly stating they cannot.
They're two different things. So youth engagement diversion officers are seen as outside of core policing, so they don't reach that threshold, whereas the DWO role is seen as that core policing. So we will be unequivocal with our approach, to be child-centred, to live up to your children's strategy, that young people need to be consulted around it.
And you're happy that this will be covered in the change of status from officers in the community teams?
Sorry?
You're happy that this will be covered by what the work that the community-based teams will be doing, that youth engagement piece? There'll be somebody there who, as far as you're concerned, is deliberately going out and engaging with youth. You're certain that will happen?
Well, I'll continue to make sure that we're having the oversight to make sure that that is happening. I know from what I've seen in Croydon that there is going to be a superintendent given the responsibility to continually engage with schools, as well as this new role. But that's the role of us in terms of oversight, is to make sure that does happen. So I'm happy to come back and report further on it.
We'd like that, because I go back to Assembly Member Roberts' point about a KPI. What's the measure? To be clear, Croydon are particularly good at youth outreach. Is your KPI that everybody else has that superintendent in place? How many do? Where are you recording this information? Because what again, I go back to my point about meetings. You have meetings, it makes people feel warm and fuzzy, but is it actually what's happening? And by having somewhere where you have a definite what you want, a KPI, somebody holds the responsibility for that, and it is measured. So could you put your hand on your heart and say the same thing's happening in Ealing or Kensington or anywhere else?
No, I mean, it's a very recent change, so we need to make sure that it is embedded. I think you're right to say that we want to hold them, across London to the highest standards, and that's definitely what I would be pushing for. But we can, as I said, I'm happy to come back. The change was only made just before Christmas, and so we will continue to have oversight on it. We have dedicated officers within MOPAC dedicated to children and young people who regularly look at this work. So we can maybe put some things together around that.
Yeah, that's what I'm driving at. I'm glad to hear that you have someone who's looking at it. What we would be interested to know is, who is that person? I mean, as a job role, not as an individual. Who is that person? What are they looking at? And when could we expect to receive the information? Because one of the, for me personally, and I think for many people around this table, constant complaints is we are reassured. We never see the KPI. So we'd be very interested in that KPI being developed and then understanding when we would see the results of that.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have oversight around the children's strategy and the delivery plan on that. This is part of that, so we can use that as the framework.
Okay, so at some point we expect to see a KPI that says, around youth engagement, for instance, you gave the fact that there's a superintendent in Croydon. We would then ask the question, is there one in Ealing? Is there one in Streatham? Who is covering? We will ask that question, and you will have that data at some point.
Yeah, if that's the data you want, then yeah, we can.
That one measure for me is very nice. But the point I'm making is that you need to go back and develop the data that you would be comfortable telling us signifies that the youth engagement piece is still going on.
So we have obviously the evaluation of the children's strategy. This allocation of officers is one part of that. So we obviously look at the matrix across the children's strategy, and that's the way we have the level of assurance that work is being embedded into the Metropolitan Police.
Okay, thank you. We'll appreciate that. Chair, back to you.
Thank you. Can you just clarify this for me? Are you talking about the superintendents that have now been put in place in every single borough, or is this a different structure?
No, that's those are dedicated ward officers, so that would be above that.
Right, okay. If we could have something in writing that we can actually hold on to, that would be really helpful. We'll write to you with what we want.
I mean,
Thank
just to
you.
say in terms of how we will hold the Met to account on this, if you look at our children's strategy, each section has how the Met is going to hold themselves to account on it. For example, I think in the superintendents, they have to have had some training. And then it's something about quality of mass referrals. So that's the sort of stuff that we're being set up to look at in that regard, to see that the outcomes that the Met are saying, and we think the children's strategy, good strategy, and that they're actually being delivered.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Moving to the Royal Parks Police. How will neighbourhood teams be impacted by having to absorb the duties of the Royal Parks unit?
We, obviously, as I said to Assembly Member Cooper, we're still working through those allocations from the Met and what they're doing with that. I want to also make sure that, I know this is an area that you have raised previously in the committee, so I'm keen to understand alongside any changes for all of the budgetary choices, what the mitigations are, but particularly around this one, and working through, as you said, the proposal in the original tough choices was that would be embedded into the neighbourhood teams. So what are the what are the details of that need to come to the fore, and how are any, I know you mentioned this previously, the specialities of the particular parks, particularly, with the deers in is it Richmond Park?
Richmond Park and Bushy Park.
Yeah, exactly.
I believe there are some also in Greenwich, I might be wrong.
So it's like, making sure that those things are understood and what are the mitigations if that choice has to be taken that have been thought through.
Okay, well, specifically what additional resources, because obviously if we are asking ward teams to go quite deep into what can be classed as pretty rural areas for the right deep in the heart of Richmond Park, will you be giving them additional resources in order to make those journeys, electric vehicles, electric bikes, off-road equipment?
I mean, those are obviously operational decisions for the Metropolitan Police. I think I know that.
But you're the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, and therefore Deputy Mayor, the Mayor himself is a Police and Crime Commissioner, so he will be wanting to make sure that these areas are kept as safe as possible.
No, and definitely, I've talked repeatedly in the meeting today about the importance of neighbourhood policing, and in this case, if we're giving them the additionality of taking on these responsibilities, we need to make sure that that's right. I regularly meet with the teams that I sign off those decisions in terms of resource allocations. So, that is something, making sure that the Met have the right equipment for the job is definitely key to that.
Okay, and will there be additional training given to ward officers? Because the Royal Parks themselves are governed by a whole set of individual Royal Parks legislations which are discrete to the Royal Parks. So I'm just looking here, the Royal Parks and Open Spaces Regulations 1997, Open Park Spaces Park Trading 2000, the amendment of 2004, the amendment of 2010, it goes on and on. These are very specialist pieces of knowledge which will be required, and there's also loads of regulations about parking. Ward officers will need to be trained to be able to fully uphold the regulations and legislation specific to the Royal Parks. Will you ensure that that training is given?
I know that the police are actively looking at the whole picture of this, and obviously the statutory responsibility that comes with the Royal Parks. I've learned a lot about swan eggs, for example. I know that there's only certain things that are in statute the responsibility of the police. So I really understand the importance of working through these particular issues and making sure the mitigations, if they have to move to that model, are thought through. I know that the police are not obviously taking any of these decisions lightly, have stood up groups to work through all of these decisions, and we will continue to make sure that through evidence like your own and others around the Royal Parks that we're thinking those issues through.
Okay. Do you think that there will be a need for any changes to legislation? I'm just looking at the regulations here, and it says constable includes a park constable within the meaning of Section 3 of the Park Regulation Act 1872, as amended by the Park Regulation Amendment Act 1974. Do you reckon we'll need to have legislative change in order to ensure that wards teams can effectively and legally police the parks?
Obviously, I can't make legislative change.
No. Is it your understanding that that might need to happen?
We haven't taken the decision yet. I think we need to make sure that we have all of the details, all of the mitigations. If there's things that we get to that stage, I'm slightly concerned that we're talking about hypotheses on hypotheses here.
Well, the reason why we're talking about hypotheses is we have very little information to go on.
Because we haven't that's where we are in the process.
All of this work should have been looked at before a list of tough choices was published.
We didn't know what the budget allocation would be. You know, we had to start somewhere. Obviously, the Commissioner has to operationalise these changes. So it was important that to the Commissioner that he was able to lay out what they could be, because, you know, we're not talking the Metro, but we're talking about a scale here of thousands, right? You can't take those changes. So I believe it's right that he laid out what they could be, that he was transparent about that, and now that we have the full allocation of funding, that we're working that through.
Okay. Just one further question, and this relates to roll parks, but also the community policing aspect. What engagement have you had with the various stakeholders for the roll parks, such as either the Royal Parks Board, Friends of Richmond and Bushy Park, Friends of Greenwich Park, all of the usual stakeholders which would have an interest in these things, to understand their concerns and hear them for yourself?
I mean, they have been making representations into the office. We've been responding to those representations. And
have you met any of them?
Well, I have actually. I've met one group who are making representations around that issue. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I can understand this massive concern, because it's not just another ward or even a different borough. We are looking at acres and acres. I'm sure you know how many. I don't, I'm afraid. But acres, 5,900 acres to be policed. So it is a massive thing. When will the assessment of the impact of that cut, if indeed the cut is made, when will the assessment of that impact be published?
Once again, Chair, I think it's difficult for me to talk about something that hasn't happened. I think it's important that we get to that stage.
I know, but you can't make the decision unless you've assessed the impact it's going to make. So that would come before the decision. So you must be making an assessment of the impact of it before you make that decision, because it should go that way round. So when do you think that assessment is going to be made? Because this does affect a hell of a lot of people, and they are concerned at what might happen and what might happen to this wonderful land. So the assessment has got to come before, surely, the decision. So that's what I'm asking. When do you expect the assessment to have been made?
To be obviously, I know you know this, Chair, but obviously that is a decision that will be taken by the Metropolitan Police. I know that that's one of the reasons the Commissioner talked about the tough choices in the autumn, so that they could work up these working plans and assessment of the impact and what the mitigations are.
Yeah, you're right. I understand that. But equally, we all understand if you're going to cut the flying squad, if you're going to cut the Royal Police, whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to assess the damage that that's going to do before you make the decisions. So at what point will all these assessments be made? And you're the Deputy Mayor, you should know, I'd be asking every day, well, at what point will these assessments be made so you can look at these vile decisions that you're having to make to see which would have the least impact? So when are those assessments going to be finished?
That is actively what the Commissioner is doing currently. So those assessments are ongoing. And as I said to Assembly Member Cooper, it's really important that he has the space to get that right because of exactly what you said, Chair. So because of the impact, the importance of it.
I get that, but because of the budgetary issues, he's obviously going to have to do it at pace in order to make the savings. So approximately, when are you looking for those assessments to be out there?
I mean, I think maybe this is a question that you want to write to the Commissioner about.
No, I'm asking you. You're the Deputy Mayor for Policing. you must be asking all the time, when are these assessments going to be finished, so that you can all look? Because clearly, I mean, I know it's an operational matter, there'll be a political side to this. You must be interested to know when these assessments are going to have been finished, so you can make those very difficult decisions.
To give assurance that I obviously am, day to day working with the Met on the budget, and talking through the key principles of those, talking through MOPAC officers as well about the level of assurance that they're seeing. The CEO goes to senior leadership meetings with them to talk through all of the things that they are doing on the budget and the work that they're doing to work it up, to have a suite of decisions that have been fully operational, the mitigation plans are there. But I think that the issue that we're talking about is, like if we're taking the parks as an example, the scale of that is significant.
I understand that. So you might be saying to me it won't be done till August. All I'm asking for is give us a clue as to when all these dreadful decisions, some of which might have to be taken, at what point will we have actually seen the assessment of the damage that they will do?
I can.
Do you not know? If you just don't know, just say I don't know.
I don't know. Currently, we can write to you because
no. If you can write to me, you can tell me. You must know. This is such an important thing. These are such important decisions that you must have some clue as to when the decisions are going to be made. If you know when the decisions are going to be made, we'll know that the assessments will come before that.
I am not at all negating the importance of these decisions. I want to be really clear on that.
You don't know. I'm going to have to leave it because you clearly don't know, which is very disappointing and doesn't give me any comfort whatsoever. We're now moving on to Assemblymember Small Edwards, and I'm sorry, some of this has sort of been asked, but I'm sure you'll get on with it well.
Thank you, Chair. We've also spoken a lot about dedicated ward officers, but one of the issues within my BCU is ward officers in kind of more residential wards will often get pulled into the central London, often the West End, for kind of high-profile events, for state visits, for protests. And I know this happens with officers throughout London as well. So my question is, obviously, that leaves those more residential wards feeling a bit understaffed and a bit vulnerable. So is MOPAC working with the Met to bring down the number of neighbourhood officers kind of abstracted at short notice?
I mean, yes, this is an ongoing and active conversation. I think it's important that we understand that abstractions can be partly because of the needs of other areas, like especially central London, that we all recognise over the last few years that the number of protests going up has meant that, but this is something that we actively challenge the police on. Also, it's important to understand that abstraction can be for things like that, but it can also be for training, it can be for court days. There's a mixed picture in there, and that is obviously very important in terms of the policing of London, that, an officer is giving evidence in court. That said, that we are pushing them on getting abstraction right. Commissioner has put in a plan around making sure that everyone has a greater standard of aid days on big events, so that everyone in the Met has to contribute to those, which has led to a reduction in abstraction. To give you the particulars, the total abstraction from BCUs is 19.8%, and this is slightly lower than 12 months previously, where it was 20%. It's obviously small, but I want to assure people that we're pushing this. We get it, especially, as you say, between the division between more residential areas and perhaps town centres.
Thank you for that. And that 19.8% number, is that the percentage amount of time on abstraction of each officer?
Yeah, so so that's right. So basically that includes stuff like training, court attendance, which actually are an intrinsic part of the officer role. I think what you're specifically talking about is abstraction for aid, which has actually gone down over the last few months from about 6% to about 4%. And now I think everyone in this room would recognise that the Met's been under extraordinary and unprecedented pressure in terms of the aid following the 7th of October and the need to police the marches. So in a way, you would have expected that to be higher. What I would say about what the Met had been doing prior to that is we had seen a genuine change in terms of where those officers were being taken from. Previously, they did used to, broadly speaking, just come from response or neighbourhood and stuff, and then actually, if you take it from response, where do you backfill that from your neighbourhood team? So, like, yeah, exactly. Whereas I do think under the Commissioner on the DEP, they have moved that and made it a much more Met-wide issue in terms of everybody contributing. So I do think there has been positive change in that. The numbers will probably still be higher than everybody would like, but that's just a reality of having to police London with all the marches that have been going on.
And on that percentage abstraction number, do you have a breakdown for each BCU?
I can get you that if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful. Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I can see why you're asking that with where you are. But actually, as a London-wide Assembly member, I flit around all over the place. And wherever I go, if you go to community meetings where people are connected with the police, are locked into policing, this is the question that comes up. When I was last in Wandsworth, it came up. People are saying that they look for their local neighbourhood team and they're just not there because they're being abstracted. And then the police officers come to the meeting as well. And it's not their fault. They are constantly taken away. And with the summer coming, because some people that go out there and campaign and stick themselves to roads or whatever else they do, they tend to do it more in the summer. So we're going to be inundated again, I can only imagine, with a load more demonstrations of various sorts. And then, of course, they come off the neighbourhood policing. Added to the fact that we are losing officers as well because of the budget, this puts the police in a dreadful position and will not help with trust and confidence in any event, will it? Is there any way of looking at a different way of doing this? Because it just hammers the police the whole time.
I mean, I think it's important, and that this is why it's important that prioritisation of neighbourhood officers is there, so that there's more officers in those spaces that gives more flex. We are a capital city. We, know that holds extra responsibility. It's good that the government has recognised that by putting in the NIC this year, and we need to continue to make sure that is recognised going forward.
Yeah, you keep mentioning extra money, but the reality is we are losing police officers. We cannot afford to lose police officers. You're going to be making some dreadful decisions on where they're going from, whether it's the flying squad, whether it is in the royal parks. If you put the local neighbourhood team in charge of these royal parks, and then there's a whole summer of discontent, if you like. Not only are they not going to be able to do the royal parks, they're not going to be able to do Richmond and all the areas around there. We're just going to have everybody in central London dealing with demonstrations, and that will completely wreck neighbourhood policing again, won't it?
I mean, that's why we're prioritising neighbourhood policing, and that's why, the additional money from government being allocated to neighbourhood policing enables that. God willing that we don't have a summer of discontent, but we need to make sure that we have a model that has the flexibility of that. I think it's something that, we can. I'm having a thematic meeting coming up on demonstrations and public order. This is something that obviously we continue to make sure that we are focused on because we're a capital city.
Okay,
I
hear what you say.
Just given what you and Assembly Member Small Edwards has said, I'll take away and see whether there's actually anything we can do more publicly about making abstraction numbers per sort of BCU or ward things more public, because I think if people are interested in that, rather than having to come back, if we can just proactively provide that for you, that's probably more helpful.
Well, perhaps if it's more public, then perhaps those that make the decisions will look at it and think, blimmin' heck, that looks dreadful, and not put it in. Do you want to come in on this issue?
Just quickly, when we had someone from the Met talking about public order policing before, they were talking about how they keep it under review, how many officers they keep in kind of reserve. So I just wondered if that's something that's still keeping under review and that they're looking at that, because obviously part of this is the scale of the policing of protest is another angle of looking at this from.
Yes, they do. I mean, I think that's also, I know that the police obviously take every opportunity to meet with the organisers of protests and understand the logistics of what the protest organisers are wanting to do because of that, because they need to be able to staff it appropriately.
Yeah, and obviously taking into account kind of the intention of protest, likelihood of violence, etc., etc. Yeah, okay. It'd be interesting to hear about the meeting that you mentioned as well, so if we can have a report back. Thank you.
Last question on this section is from Assemblymember Mo Emma.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask my substantive question, I just wanted to raise a point, and perhaps in your upcoming meeting, I'd be grateful if you would raise this, and I'm sure others would, that for all of those abstractions to central London because of protests, we need to equally, I would argue more, clearly think about what happens to those neighbourhoods not in central London where there is fallout when people return home from a protest. It's happened in my constituency. And I would also add, following the terrorist attacks of the 7th of October, that there is a wider and growing issue around attacks on public buildings or those perceived to be, on one side of the argument or other, red paint. That's recently happened to one of my town halls. And I genuinely have concern for ordinary members of the community who fear going about their daily lives. So I think the abstractions piece, when it comes to protest, needs to be thought about in the round. But my main question really is around the Met's V100 initiative, which has been reported on recently. Really welcome to see that 126 people have been charged and 574 offences through that. So what the MOPAC support is to that initiative?
Yeah, just to say, Assemblymember, I would definitely do that. I know that obviously the community impact of protest direct action, especially if it has on any aspect additional discrimination bias to it, is important to understand and the community impact of that. So happy to take that question forward. On the V100, when I was the leader of Islington Council, when Mark Rowley started as Commissioner, he met with all of the leaders of the council, and this is a project that he talked passionately about, and I was genuinely excited to see. I think, you've rightly said that we're now at the 100th conviction of those involved, the top perpetrators, but to understand that that's 314 perpetrators or alleged perpetrators that have been in contact with the police. And also, as you rightly identified, that is over 500 offences. And I think in this area it's really important that we understand the levels of harm that we see in these areas. So that's really important that we continue to do that. VORG obviously is a key area of work that we do here in MOPAC. And we're right alongside the Met in this. And we're really, you may have seen the thread that I did yesterday on the top 100 and VORG and how we've worked in tandem with them on that. But it's also really important for the commissioning power of MOPAC that we have increased the amount of commissioning that we do in the perpetrator space, because it is a significantly important outcome in terms of reducing not only offending but re-offending in this space. It's a real important early intervention measure, and that's alongside the work that we do to support victim survivors, whether that be through last week we did the release of the DASA work, which is about getting women into safe accommodation who've been affected by this, and making sure that they have a pathway to go on to thrive in that, to the intervention work that we do commission through organisations. Particularly, it's important in this space to recognise the buy and for work of particularly minoritised community women that we commission. I think that is something that we stand as really have a USP in London is the commissioning we do in that space. So I think this is an area in the policing crime plan we continue to prioritise that. We're working on the VORG strategy now. We're doing masses of consultation in that, and that we're fully aligned with the work that the police are doing in public protection. Moreover, but obviously this work we need to see continue.
Okay, thank you. So the particular kind of V100 initiative, I guess the question I have, and maybe others have, is assuming it's successful, and so far it seems like it is succeeding, how will that be mainstreamed across all 32 boroughs and across all of the BCUs so that it's a part of business as usual, for want of a better phrase, for officers on the ground? And then I have a follow-up question relating to domestic abuse.
So it sort of is already mainstreamed in the it's actually the data-led approach to this is more generally done with violence, because I've also got the violence harm assessment tool, which is used to both task locally and task centrally against in the violence space. So this sort of data-led approach is now the norm.
Yeah, so sorry, when I say mainstreamed, I don't mean that I put it badly, that it's not an initiative that comes to an end when funding ends. Okay, fine. To follow on from what you said, Deputy Mayor, around buy-in for organisations, the National Police Chiefs Council have recently done some work around the level of suicides relating to domestic abuse exceeding the level of homicides relating to domestic abuse. And I just wondered, my question's in two parts, whether you are confident that officers actually understand what coercive control is, that those numbers that you've talked about for the V100 also measure and capture coercive control as a form of domestic abuse. We know that it affects men as well, but I think the numbers from the NPCC were 3/4 of those victims were women. And I say this because I was very privileged to be invited to a Women's Trust meeting recently for International Women's Day. They provide support to women survivors of domestic abuse, and they provide therapy and counselling to those women. And we had a really harrowing tale from the mother of Chloe Holland, who was a suicide victim, which directly related to domestic abuse. So I just wonder, essentially, how seriously this is being taken, and is it being captured in that data and therefore being mainstreamed across all of the BCUs?
Yes, I mean, you'll have seen from my post yesterday on X, it's just awful. It's so heartbreaking that, to lose your child at all, and to be driven to such extreme measures through violence and coercive control. So we need to take it exceptionally seriously, and we do. And the work that the Met does on the public protection teams and the level of training on that definitely includes coercive control. And I think we need to obviously make sure that we are continuing to push to see the signs of that. And something I spoke to Kenny actually about yesterday is looking at the data from the V100 and actually saying what are we seeing here in their offending history? Is there anything we can learn from that? Obviously we pride ourselves in being a public health approach organisation. So what's the early intervention things that we might look at in this space, similarly to how we have on knife crime and other areas? So I couldn't agree more. And this is something that, we've got the strategy coming forward, and really pushing the team to think about how we look at prevention in this space across all of the mayoral family and beyond. So what does that mean? Prevention against VORG or TFL, what does that mean in housing? Really thinking how we can go further in this work.
Okay, my final question, Chair.
Can we? It is neighbourhood policing section. I let that run because obviously we're all very interested in it, but it should be linked to the neighbourhood.
But to be fair, if the Met is looking at the V100 initiative specifically.
Yeah, no,
I think
and that's why I let it
absolutely
go, but we are in a neighbourhood policing section.
We've done nothing on this side that's different from any other members in following up questions.
Which is why I just let that run. I'm just saying if there's another question, if we could try.
No, thank you. It will be my final question on this, but I would say that it absolutely should. I'm asking because it should be included in the numbers, and I just want to be reassured of that. So, yes, I take your point, Chair. My final question on this, then, is currently the V100, when you're looking at tasking, and this might be an operational question for the Met directly, but when they're looking at tasking and they're looking at prioritisation, would I be right, if I'm right in thinking that they're looking at reports of violence, reports of sexual assault, reports of rape by the top 100 perpetrators, then that coercive control, where arguably hands are not laid, how do you factor that into the V100's work?
So that would all. So what they look at under the V100 is crime reports that have come in, then ranked using the Cambridge Harm Index, an objective report, and then allied to that, and then the sort of serious enough harm to the victims, if you like. And then every month that gets refreshed, sort of thing. And then there's a central tasking meeting, which they target using central resource, some of the more serious people, and then understand that the ones which aren't tasked are then given out to local teams, so they have the proactive teams that can do that. And that's the same model that's used with the VHE. VHA, coercive control, would be something which would be covered by crime reports and the Cambridge Crime Harm Index.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're now moving on to 999 and 101 response times, and we're starting off with Assembly Member Duval. Have you got your mic on?
Thank you. Well done for the latest inspection report, but there's still more work to be done around that. So how is MOPAC ensuring scrutiny oversight of how the Met responds to the calls to the service?
I mean, we regularly look at that data. You'll know that one of the key areas of concern through the Engage process was response times, and it's something that the Mayor put additional investment in to improve, and you know that was recognised, that improvement, through us coming, the Metropolitan Police coming out of Engage. So to the specifics of your question, in London, we now are at a stage where 86.2% of 999 calls are responded to within 10 seconds, and that's from January 2024 to December 2024, and this compared to 7.6% on the previous period. So as you can see, that's a significant uplift. And as you say, we can't, we need to continue to make sure that we're checking that data regularly. Alongside that, I would say it's really important that we have, the Commissioner talks about the broken foundations and rebuilding the foundations. And I think one area this really relates to is having the right tech around this in the command centres. I've been to Lambeth to see the command centre there, the call centre there. And, really understand the work that the great officers are doing there in responding to the calls. Obviously, we know how important that work is, and we need to make sure that we have the right infrastructure to back that up, especially given the volume of crime, what the volume of response needed in London. Is on that, they'll be introducing in March a new mission control voice platform. So those are the kind of technologies that we're seeing that will help with that response time. So at the moment, if you call 999, you're put into a singular queue. And that it's kind of a lottery which call centre you get put into from that queue. This will enable 3 separate queues, for a lack of a better term, to those areas and be a lot more data-led.
Okay, answering the phone is important and getting that right. The next bit is then responses and following on. Is that part of the connected issues around responses to immediate, significant, as well as extended emergencies? Is that the thinking on, because that's really the key. I make my call, I then get a response of some sort. Where are we on that? And who's leading that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I completely recognise what you're saying and seeing the team do that and actually the intricacies of that work. So, you know, literally having CCTV cameras ahead of you, seeing, you know, where having a map where you got the police officers on the map and making sure that all connects, whilst also, you know, linking in with TSG if that's needed is a really important work, and we need to make sure that you're right, that it's not just phone calls, it's the whole system, so we're looking at that.
So I think to answer your questions, I mean, there's 3 points I would say which are really important to this. One is speed of response. If somebody calls and they're in distress, I think it is actually very important that they get a speedy answer. The KPI nationally is 90%. As we've said, for the last calendar year, the Met was just below that, significant improvement, but you would want to see that continue if you could. The second point is, and it's something which picked up HMS CFRS properly, is vulnerability properly assessed at both within METCC and then by dispatch when it happens. That is happening better now in METCC. I think compliance is quite high. I still think it's down around 60-65% down in dispatch. There's still a bit more work to do around that. And then the third point, as you say, is the speed of getting to INS calls and what's happening within that. And if you look at the latest figures, like you'll be able to see that, like, for example, in the south area or southeast, there's been improvements in S-calls, but in something like central north, actually, S-call response times are down. So it's taking the whole system as a whole that you actually need to take. I totally agree with your point.
Just finally on this, just to end this question, the extended emergency call, which is the third category, are they usually 101 numbers? But you could pick them up on 999. Someone picks up and it's extended emergency. This is the one where I think you respond within 48 hours, is it, or 2 days?
Yeah, the e-calls.
So we don't emergency for the ordinary public to understand.
Yeah, so we don't. So we tend to look at the INS calls as being the key factors alongside the Thrive and the call response times, if I'm honest with you.
Now, is that split back into response, or is that passed on to other parts of the police service? So 48 hours, it could be, I presume, I don't know, I'm a layperson, a forensic visit, I presume, could be an extended emergency, or it could be, would that be passed to a safer neighbourhood team to follow up in terms of extended membership, or is it always likely to be someone from response?
So I would need to come back to that. I don't think it's always somebody from response. I'll need to.
I'd like some further information on that so we could follow up on that, because I think that's quite important about the trust and confidence, isn't it? I ring up, I might not be an immediate emergency, but when am I likely to get somebody to come and follow up on a call? Because if I make the call, it must be important to me. I'm concerned, aren't I? And so,
let me come back to you. Sorry, that's genuinely something I don't have.
From what I saw, Len, when I was in Lambeth, obviously the call centre has the ability to make those appointments the next day. So I sat in on a call where someone was, a vulnerable person was dealing with harassment, and their caseworker called for them, and so they were able to organise a next day appointment with an officer. But I think, you know, obviously we can get you that data, but I think it will depend on obviously the alleged concern.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just worth following up about performance. Chair, I'll pass over. I think Assembly Member Best is going to answer the next question.
Okay, Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. I think you've just run through there, Assembly Member DeVal, a number of the improvements that are being made. Obviously, as part of the new Met for London document, there's a number of changes. Are you happy with the speed of which those improvements are being made?
I mean, I think like the scale of need is huge, and I think, you know, some of the systems that we're talking about, one was put in place the year I was born, so, you know, they're ancient. So
I'm sure
you know,
it's not that ancient.
Well, today I feel very ancient. You know, so there's, you know, and we're talking about systems that have grown up upon systems. We're talking about, obviously, in this example, call centres where there's 3 significant sites. Obviously, with tech, you need to get the solution right, and implementing that in a way that doesn't fall over. When you're talking about 999 calls, you can't, you know, it's high risk to, you know, you can't have a system where it falls over a few times and you test and see. You just can't be given the risk. So I am reassured. Obviously, we meet with Adrian Scott from the MPS regularly to talk about this issue. I'm reassured that there's a high level of focus on getting these right, and that there's an ongoing kind of plan for phasing this kind of work, but it's definitely not without risk. And obviously, we want to be in a space, especially around tech, because of what's available, where the call handlers are getting what they need and rightly deserve, given the work that they're doing, and actually that would drive a lot of efficiency. So we continue to press them.
Okay, thanks. When do you think you'd be in a position where you think all those targets in the new Met for London around 999 and 101 calls will be met?
We're thinking about the same significant piece of work that needs to be done for the Command and Control Centre, and that's going on for has gone on for a number of years now. So, well, you know, I think it's really important that they are making, as I've mentioned, important infrastructure change like the mission control voice platform, which will really help. But I'm also conscious, I think it would be wrong for us not to acknowledge, as we talked about earlier, that in a restrained budget, you know, we don't have ongoing ring-fence capital spending in this area. That's something also that we need to be lobbying for, and I will. So, we keep on going.
Okay, so at the moment, when do you think?
So I wouldn't want, do you mean hitting the 90% and meeting INS
well,
targets?
The 90% is obviously one of the targets and one of the bits in the new Met for London. There's obviously additional bits, a lot of which we've touched on already. When do you think the whole package will be complete, as it were?
I mean, I wouldn't like to stick a exact date on it without speaking to the Met. I mean, I think what we would want to see is continuous, sustainable improvement in this space, acknowledging the challenges it's facing.
But you put quite clear targets in the new Met for London. I don't really think it's then acceptable to say, but we're not sure. We're going to be sticking our finger in the air to say when those will happen by, because otherwise what's the point in targets, what's the point in listing these down and saying this is what we're going to do if you don't have a tangible date or time period, ballpark time when these will be completed by?
I mean, I really understand what you're saying, Assembly Member Best. However, you know, the funding picture changes, and, you know, the understanding of the technology changes. There's just too many variables.
I'm saying if the funding is as it is today and there's no change, then surely you can make a call on the basis of what you have now.
I think that's a good question to put to the Met. It's the new Met for London is obviously the Met's plan. I mean, you know, for example, you know, we have the budget we have now. We're moving forward with the command and control improvements. I think that's on a 3-year contract once it gets over the line. So you can look at things like that, but I don't want to. I think it's for the Met to hold that plan.
Well, if there was an officer here, then maybe that would help.
I do think it's disappointing that so many things, we don't know when something's going to be completed by. We don't know when we're going to get answers to. And actually, Deputy Mayor's telling us to ask the Mayor is nonsensical because...
I said ask the Commissioner, not...
Oh, well, I still think you're the Deputy Mayor. You should know the answers. We're going to come now to Assembly Member Duval. This has been touched on question 21, but I don't know if you want to go further into that.
I think, the bit that I would like to just explore, Chair, about this. So the point of contact, I ring the police. Clearly, the people taking the calls are trained now, and there may well be information that I'm going to give you that I'd expect to maybe passed on to the person who's going to respond to my call. So increasingly the people we're dealing with are vulnerable, and there's a degrees of vulnerability there. So what steps are taken in identifying that vulnerability on the first point of contact? I know it's not 100% perfect, it's all part of the risk of dealing with those issues, and how is that passed on to the people, to the responders?
So they follow the Thrive Plus model, which is then taken, handed to dispatch, who then run additional intel and police systems checks, which is then passed to the responders.
Okay. On this point, Chair, can I continue with my next question? There may well be interventions. Do you want to come in?
No, I'll come in at the end.
Yeah, at the end. Yeah, okay. So now, in terms of that, the action taken to improve what the Met provides the callers with advice and crime prevention on scene preservation. Now, of course, 999 calls, you want to get them off the 999 calls if it's not pertinent to real emergencies. It's terrible to say that because if I make the call, I think it's a real emergency. But of course, you're grading these issues. So is the conversation on crime prevention and scene preservation on a 999 call, or is that more likely to be on a 101 call? What steps are being taken with the call handlers on that? Because you want to give people some advice, isn't it? If they're not getting an emergency immediate reaction from the police, what steps are you taking to either reassure me or to do the right thing during that time, whether it's preserving the scene of crime or not? Do we know? If you don't know, that's fine. If you could find out for us and share it with us, that would be, appropriate. We'd like to do this because there may well be some more follow-up work that we'd want to do. And I think certainly, Chair, about some of the performance calls. So the number of so much. I'm very grateful. I think I've got the information around how quickly you answer the phone. I think the next steps for this committee may want to look at actually how good we are at responding as you hand it, as the call handlers hand it to the people on the ground. What's those responses and that? But if you could provide any of that information as well, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, we'll ask for a written question, and I suspect we'll come back to this.
And I just want to be clear. So the things that you're quoting into earlier questions are in the new Met's plan. I presume, just for clarity on my own mind, the targets are not chosen by MOPAC, are the targets chosen by the police? You may want to reflect a little bit about why we're uncertain if they're police targets, but also it just goes to something earlier the Chair said, the importance of attending these sessions to give clarity about their own targets and why they're not may not be as clear as targets as they could be.
Very good point. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Just touching on the subject right at the beginning of this section, it sounded awfully like the call response system that you were describing was an AI system. No, is it not an AI system?
Can you put your microphone on, please?
Yeah, the three Qs.
Yes. No, it's just a better system.
Okay. Will you be considering the implementation of AI? I'm asking because this is public domain stuff. So it's just that West Midlands Police have seen a huge increase in timeliness of responses. They're seeing something like 97% of their calls are answered within 10 seconds. And also, vulnerable users of 101, when they finally get through, are identified and they are prioritised as a result of AI technology. And this is something which has transformed, apparently, the provisions in the Westminster. They've gone from, requires improvement to outstanding in terms of, Ofsted stuff. Will you be looking at that?
I mean, we always try and take best practice from all around the country. And I think, given the area of tech is always moving, we need to really make sure that we are doing that. I know that Adrian Scott, as I mentioned before, the head of transformation within the police, is looking, at, as I mentioned before, the most effective and efficient ways of taking transformation across the police. And I'm happy to make sure that he's conscious of the West Midlands model and think about that in terms of the way forward on the phone, because obviously we want to be outstanding as well.
Thank you. I think it would be useful, Chair, if we could get a written update on that, because if we are seeing such transformation in other areas, then we want necessarily to make sure that we can deliver that level of service for Londoners.
And just to say, I have frequent back and forth with the West Mids office for police and crime. They were down. I think last year I was up in the West Mids last year, and I think it's over 97% by one decimal point or something. Anyway, so it was on my list for things to speak to them about in terms of the next time that I go up or they come down.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll put something in writing to you if we can have it back, and I suggest to the committee that we bring this back at another Q&A session. Okay, we've only got 15 minutes for the next section, which is Stop and Search Charter. So we'll start off with Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
When will the findings of the Stop and Search research being undertaken by the London Disproportionality Board be published? And will these findings from this research help the Met with how they conduct Stop and Search?
We are hoping to publish that in autumn 25, and we obviously, we've worked with the Met on our research of this, and we undertake research to help and support better policing in London. So the recommendations we do hope will be of help.
Okay. What actions will you take to ensure that the Met Stop and Search Charter fosters trust and confidence in the fair use of Stop and Search? Because most of the conversation about Stop and Search is had by people who are anti it, including the Mayor. He's very anti-Stop and Search. But there's large parts of the community who are very pro-Stop and Search. So how can we be reassured that it will be conducted with some balance?
I think do you mean the Stop and Search Charter or the research? Sorry.
All of it, the Charter in particular.
Oh, okay.
How will it be enacted? So, how do we make sure it isn't a one-sided conversation?
So I think that actually the way in which the MPS has taken about putting the Charter together is really important. What's Ade's surname? Sorry. Ade Alkin, the responsible officer who's taken this work forward, talks very passionately about starting with a blank page and not a single word being written on that page that hasn't come from the community, especially, and I know as a previous youth worker you'll be keen on this, especially involving young people in that work. So he's consulted with thousands of community groups and Londoners and residents and to get the charter to where it is, and it was released a few weeks ago. I think reflecting on conversations with him though, he's now working up 8 plans that look at how the charter is implemented that will lie underneath the Stop and Search Charter, and by his own volition, he said to me that the proof of the pudding will be knowing whether those implementation plans have landed well with communities, with Londoners. So it's a significant piece of work. They talk about it as a resetting in relation to people of London with Stop and Search, but also obviously their own police force.
Okay, because the Commissioner's comments were that this document is gives licence and legitimises the way in which the Met have been doing Stop and Search, and it's not to be seen, the Charter's not to be seen as the idea that they're retreating from that. would you say that what's your hope for it? Is your hope that it is this blank page, that it is a reset? Because even I, as someone who's pro-stop and search all day long, I do accept that it's been done poorly in the past. It could be done better. But what's your hope for it? As the Deputy Mayor, what is your hope for the impact of this charter? What will it do in the conversations we have around stop and search?
I mean, Lord Bailey, if I may, I think you've hit right on the issue, right? Is that we want to have the highest quality of stop and searches. It's not the tactic itself, it's how it's implemented, and that's what we all want, is, interactions that are seen as fair and have meaningful outcomes based on and the highest levels of procedural justice. So that's my hope for it, and I think that it's important that that is continually looked at, and I hope that through these implementation plans, through the continual engagement on this issue, that will happen.
Can I just be brief and say, so actually, if you look at all the demographics across London, generally all supportive of stop and search. If you look at black and mixed ethnicity Londoners, they actually have less than 50% are confident it will be done fairly. So that's exactly the point you're making. And if you look at levels of trust of Londoners who are stopped and searched, it does go down, but only very, very remotely if they think that stop and search is carried out well. If they think the stop and search is carried out badly, i.e. there's no procedural justice, their trust in the Met drops massively. So what you would want to see is the percentage of people who think, as a result of the Charter and the work that the Met are doing, that stop and search is done fairly, actually go up, and that should drive up trust overall in the Met.
But isn't that going to be tough, because a number of those people who stopped and searched will then go on to be charged, or so you can see how they might have a negative feeling about being stopped and searched. Is that taken into account?
Yeah. So you're never going to keep everybody who's stopped and searched happy, because some of them absolutely. But for a large number of people, actually, there will be no further action. I mean, even in the most recent figures, I think it's something like 33% have an outcome of the stop and searches, which suggests that for 67% of the people that you're still going to be able to have a procedurally just, properly done stop and search, which is sort of culturally sensitive and deals with the issues. And I think that's what the Charter's all about, and actually having community oversight of it, which is something, and it being them themselves to look at that, have the officers actually looking at it properly and doing some proper feedback to people about how it's all done, and actually be able to look at some of the issues which we think really matter the most. For example, stop and search of children is probably an area where you would want officers to really focus on looking at, as opposed to if somebody stops and searches me, etc., etc. So I think that's the sort of stuff which actually you would really hope to see change as the result of this.
Okay, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thank you. The Stop and Search Charter states that an independent governing body will assess the progress of the Met's commitments. Can you say what that body looks like? And also, to fold into that, I'm not clear on what the role of MOPAC or the Mayor is, because it's not really mentioned in the Charter. So if you could speak to that, as well as the independent governing body. Thanks.
So they're currently working, the Met, to develop a framework for community scrutiny, moreover for policing, but obviously that would involve this area, and that's something that we would be delivering jointly with them.
Do you have a timescale for when that independent governing body will be in place?
I hope to see real progress in that by early next year, with at least being started to be implemented. That's what we're working on at the moment, but we have a sort of delivery partner in at the moment, ourselves and the Met, working up the PID and the full scope to make sure that we can do it, and then I'll be able to give you greater specificity following that.
Great. And can you just expand on what the consequences of the Met not following the Charter as an officer level, as well as generally if there's a sense that it's not being followed?
Well, I mean, as I said, I think it's also us making sure that the implementation plans are felt to be delivered upon, because the Charter is the Charter itself, but seeing those delivery implementation plans underneath those, and really taking the Charter from, a a kind of concept to an actionable way of working is really important in that. And then obviously MOPAC's oversight will be really intrinsic to that. And then we'll also continually, obviously through the public survey work that we do and the work that we do on trust and confidence, moreover, that we will continue under the police and crime plan to have key matrix around those areas. So this is something that we will have ongoing checkpoints on.
Yeah, that's the reassurance I think people need, that there's consequence and it's going to be followed up. The bit I wanted to pick up on was the bit under the better public understanding of stop and search, where it mentions a couple of places about people having a better understanding of their rights. So it mentions that the MPS is going to communicate their rights, as well as leaflets and posters created and distributed kind of on bus stops and the network and stuff. So I just wondered if you knew how much of a priority that is and how quickly that's going to happen.
Yeah, so that's the Go Wisely campaign, and I think it's an acronym of the actions, right?
Yeah, and that's happening already. We're starting to distribute that. It came to the last community monitoring group chairs meeting about 3 weeks ago, and there was, which is the local community groups which oversee stop and search within their individual boroughs, and a number of those had been distributed all around London. There were suggestions made there about how they might better publicise that more generally.
Great, that's great to hear. And just one last thing, just to pick up on what you said, Kenny, a moment ago about how people judge if it's been good, if procedural justice has been served. At a previous meeting, the Commissioner said that stop and search might result in somebody being reminded it's not a good idea to carry a weapon. And I just wondered how that squares with people feeling like procedural justice has been served, if that's the Commissioner's view of how stop and search might be used. That was after I said that 70% of stops didn't result in anything.
I mean, I think that's obviously a question for the Commissioner, but I suppose the hope would be that it's a positive interaction with a officer, and that if that was to be a likely concern, there's an opportunity to reiterate the importance of safety, and in that if you carry a knife, you're more likely to be harmed by a knife, or you harm yourself with a knife. I think it's a bit of a strange question, because I'm now trying to guess what he meant.
I think it's getting to kind of suspicionless or suspicion-led stop and search, and how it's what Kenny was saying about whether it's just to have carried this stop and search out in the first place, rather than just remind people that it's not a good idea to carry a weapon, because there's tons of bias and prejudice baked into that.
Yeah, sorry. Obviously, one of the tenets that needs to be rightly upheld on stop and search is reasonable grounds, and how we make sure that there's ongoing evidence of reasonable grounds, I think is the key part of what you're alluding to.
I also don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. I think you can just as well have a stop and search, assuming there is suspicion that's entailed, and at the same time you can have a positive interaction with somebody and tell them about, pass on information, remind them of safety, give key messages to them. That should be part and parcel of a sort of positive interaction with members of the public, whether it's via stop and search or elsewhere, I would have thought.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. Very briefly, have the members of this body already been appointed? Who is going to appoint them? Because you know how miffed people on this particular committee were, that for the London Policing Board, that it was all mayoral appointments. Who's going to choose these people?
So they've not been appointed. We're just working up the scope. Part of that will be how we go about doing it. I suspect it will be evolution to begin with rather than revolution, in that we have a number of people on these bodies already that will probably start serving so that there isn't a gap in the service, whilst we then work out the best way of bringing on extra or additional whatever's identified by the programme as being required.
Okay, well, it's something we'll all keep a watch on. Thank you. So that brings us to the end. Particularly, Kaya, thank you so much for coming when you're clearly not well. So I would like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions. This is the last committee meeting of this term, so I would like to thank colleagues for their help and assistance, and particularly officers, Jeanette and Lauren in particular, you've been a great help. Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the monthly report from MOPAC? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. The London Assembly's annual meeting is due to take place in May 2025, which will decide which committees to establish for the 25-26 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.